Okay, hello everyone, I'm live. So I thought I'd do a call-in show, and let me know if my audio's okay. I have headphones that I could use that might improve things if it's not. So I'm currently a bit sick, and I thought it might be a fun day to have a call-in show where people could call in to argue about the success of the anthropic argument, where people could call in to talk about psychophysical harmony, and so on. So for that reason, I decided to do a call-in show where I would argue with live callers about the success of these various arguments. So I guess, hey Shiru. So I guess I'll start by just explaining what the anthropic argument is, because that's the most fun. That's my favorite of the bunch. And, in recent news, by the way, one of the leading critics of the anthropic argument has walked back some of his objections when he and I had a conversation about them. Yeah. So what's the anthropic argument? So it starts from the fact that you exist. Okay, we already knew that, that you exist. But there's a view called the self-indication assumption. And what the self-indication assumption says is that you existing is more likely if there are more people. So the idea is, imagine that a coin gets flipped, and if it comes up heads, one person gets created, and if it comes up tails, 10 people get created. Suppose that you get created from this process. The self-indication assumption says you should say the tails is 10 times likelier than heads. After all, it's 10 times as likely that you would come to exist if there are in total 10 times as many people that exist. Suppose that we grant this, and I have reasons that we ought to grant this. This is not just a matter of something I believe without argument. I think there are about, I've listed about 20 arguments in various places for the anthropic argument. So suppose we grant the anthropic argument. And by the way, how's my audio, everyone? Is it good? I can change to headphones, which might make it better if it's not good, but if it's good, happy to stick with it. The idea is, from the fact that you exist, you should think there are more people. Now, so obviously, if say 10 people exist, then that makes your existence 10 times as likely by SIA. And if 100 people exist, that makes your existence 100 times as likely by SIA's lights. So then, just by the same logic, if infinity people exist, then your existence is infinitely likelier. And by the way, you're all free to call in and argue about these arguments. So if infinity people exist, then it's infinitely likelier that you would exist. But it turns out it doesn't actually stop there, because there are bigger and smaller infinities. The same points that apply to small infinity, to why you should think there are infinite people, also applies for why you should think there's a big infinite people. For why you should think that there's a big infinity worth of people. Bloop, I'll get to that in a moment. Right, if there are, so the smallest infinity is called Aleph null. It's also the same as Beth 0. Bigger than that is Beth 1, bigger than that is Beth 2. So from the fact that you exist, you should think at least the number of people that exists is like the most that it could be, right? So but a lower bound on the number of people that there could be is Beth 2. So you should think at least there are Beth 2 actual people. You should be infinitely certain of this. And then if you're infinitely certain, and then the idea for the anthropic argument is, once you conclude that you ought to be infinitely certain that there are infinite people, once you're certain that the total number of people that exists is infinity, is Beth 2, this favors theism. If God exists, he'd be likely to create lots of people. It's good to create, after all. And so he would keep creating until he's created the maximum number of people that he could create. But insofar as God keeps creating until he creates the maximum number of people that he could create, then that means that Beth 2 people existing, or at least, whatever the number of whatever the most people that could exist, let's call it n, right? So n is the most people that there could be, right? So the idea is that, well, it's really likely on theism that n people would exist, but really unlikely on atheism. Okay, so in short, just to recap, you exist. You existing is more likely if there are more people as per the self-indication assumption. By this reasoning, you should think there are infinite people. By this reasoning, you should think there's a big infinity worth of people, and then there being a big infinity worth of people is likelier on theism than on atheism. Okay, in Bloop, you say, you think it all hinges on SIA. I think this is exactly right. I think SIA is really the only philosophically controversial premise in the argument, the only one that's seriously open to doubt. Okay, but so then the question is, why should we accept SIA? Well, there are a lot of arguments. If you Google anthropic thoughts WordPress, all the arguments for SIA, or just go to anthropic thoughts WordPress, you'll be able to find this article that I wrote where I laid out basically all the arguments for SIA. There are in total, let's see, how many did I give? I in total gave 27 arguments for SIA. Now, some of them were a little sketchy. They're making 27 arguments. They're not all going to be winners. But I think they were all, like, at the very least, none of them were obviously wrong. Like, they range from, like, really decisive to, like, sort of unclear. But here's the most core reason to accept SIA. And no, Bloop, it doesn't require assumptions that atheists won't accept. Most people who accept SIA are in fact atheists. Most the people who have talked about it in the literature are atheists. So here's let me just give what I think are the two best arguments for SIA, or maybe the three best. I'll give between the 2 and 4 best arguments depending on my mood and how long it takes. So the first argument is that suppose that we reject SIA. Now, suppose that we're considering, should I assume there are other people identical to you, Jonas, or Jonas? I don't know why I said Jonas. Actually, I do. I've been watching the show Dark, and the main character is called Jonas. Yes, you should assume there are well, when we say identical to you, we mean just in the sense that you're not sure which of them you are. So the idea is, like, suppose you think the universe is infinite. Well, there are other people identical to you in the sense that there are people that are your same genetic makeup, for example, and then that are, like, on the other side of the universe. So that's the sense in which you should assume they're identical to you. They're not the same person as you, but they are such that you don't, like, suppose you're given a description of the Jonas on Earth versus on the distant version of Earth that has the duplicate. They're such that you don't know which of them you are. Okay, so anyways, so suppose we reject SIA, and let's assume that you're in the Garden of Eden. You're one of the first 2 people, but you don't know it. And God sets up this scheme. Obviously, this one doesn't require actually believing in God. Okay, this is just a hypothetical. And God sets up the scheme where what he does is he says, the first 2 people will play a game of poker. And if they get 10 royal flushes, then they'll remain, then, the human species will be just them. If they get anything else, I'll create, galaxies, just huge numbers of future offspring. Okay, so now suppose you get created. As a matter of fact, you're one of the first 2 people, but you don't know that. And then you're informed that you're one of the first 2 people. Now, suppose that you reject SIA. Well, because you reject SIA, you don't think that it's dramatically more likely that you would come to exist in a world where you don't think it's dramatically more likely you'd exist if the world has more people, right? So you don't think that if the world has all those descendants, then you're likelier to exist. But then because you've learned that you're one of the first 2 people, now you should be really confident that the first 2 people won't have any descendants. After all, consider the 2 hypotheses. Hypothesis 1 is the first 2 people don't have any descendants. And hypothesis 2 is the first 2 people have a lot of descendants. That's true. Hypothesis 2 starts with a higher prior than hypothesis 1. But hypothesis 1, actually, let me write out, H1, I'll put it in the comments. H1 equals lot of equals no descendants. H2 equals lot of descendants. Okay. Yeah, just type that in the chat. So on the hypothesis that the first two people have a lot of descendants, it's highly unlikely epistemically that you'd be one of the first two people. After all, you might have been any of the people. And so upon learning that you're one of the first two people, now that's super surprising on the hypothesis that the first two people have lots of descendants. And so now you should think almost certainly they won't have that many descendants, right? Because the idea is that previously you thought, H1 was more likely, but H2 was more likely, but not like that much more likely, only, by a factor of a few, 100,000 to the power, only by a pretty large margin. But now you've learned you're one of the first two people, which is just conditional on the hypothesis two being true. It's just so unlikely that you'd be one of the first two people. While conditional on hypothesis one, it's guaranteed that you'd be one of the first two people. And you get a massive update in favor of hypothesis one. But that means that now you're really confident that a fair game of poker that has not yet been played will involve you getting 10 royal flushes. Because now you know that you're one of the first two people. Now, SIA exactly cancels this out in a very elegant way, because what it says is, yes, it's really unlikely that you'd be one of the first two people if there are a bunch of descendants, but it's a lot more likely that you would exist at all. And so the two probabilities just precisely cancel out, and it cancels out perfectly. So that was in terms of royal flushes. Now, here's a more sort of like fundamental point. Here's just a simpler case that might make the point clearer. I think this case is sort of less dramatic, but I think it might make the intuition clearer. So let's imagine that one person's created, and then a coin's flipped, and if it comes up tails, 9 other people get created. Okay, I'll just write this out in the chat. Okay. So suppose that you don't know that you're the first person. By the way, oh wait, I didn't post the link to the call-in show. Sorry, I should have done that. So yeah, you're all free to call in. Here's the link to join. Okay, it's now in the chat. I'm sorry, not in the chat, in the description. So, okay, one person's created, a coin is flipped, and if it comes up tails, 9 extra people get created. So suppose you get created, you don't know your birth order, and then you learn you're the first person. So the way non-SIAs think is they think, well, your existence isn't 10 times as likely if there are 10 times as many people. But if there are 10 times as many people, the odds are only 1 in 10 that you'd be the first person if there are 10 people. And so after learning that you're the first person, because that's guaranteed if there's only one person, but only at 1 in 10 odds if it's guaranteed if you're the first person, but it only has 10% odds if you're not the first person. For that reason, it's guaranteed. It's guaranteed if there's only one person, but it only has 1 in 10 odds if there are a total of 10 people. So now you should think that at 10, 11 odds, there will only be one person, right? Because if there's only one person, it's guaranteed you'd be the first guy. While if there are 10 people, then there's only 1 in 10 chance that you'd be the first person. So you should think at 10, 11 odds that there's only one person. But wait a minute, because you're the first person, you know that you're going to flip a coin that will determine whether there are other people. So now you get the result that you think at 10, 11 odds, at 10 out of 11 odds, that a fair coin that hasn't been flipped yet will come up heads. And the point is we can change around these numbers to make it so that you're not only confident in the results of a coin flip, but you're confident in the results of 1,000 royal flushes, which is pretty silly. So that's one argument for SIA. I'll give another argument for SIA in a moment, but I'll answer some of the chat questions first. So Bloop asks, says the universe doesn't evidentially appear to be teeming with persons. Right, so this is true, but the idea is that there's an infinite multiverse which contains infinite people. And our best physics, it does actually seem, well, so the universe does appear to be teeming with persons in the sense that I think our best physics seems to point to the universe being infinite in size. Again, I'm not a physics guy. I don't know this stuff, but this is what I've read. It does seem to point to our universe being infinite in size. And so then it's teeming with persons. And a weird fact is there aren't actually more people if the universe, like, so imagine you had like 100 people per galaxy versus only one person per galaxy. And there are infinite galaxies. In which scenario do you have more people? The answer, you actually have the same number of people. In both cases, you have Aleph null people. And the way to see this is that just by moving the people around, you could switch up the scenario where you have one person per galaxy to be the scenario where you have 100 people per galaxy, just by having the first 100 the people from the first 100 galaxies move into galaxy 1, person from the next 100 galaxies move into galaxy 2, and so on. Yeah. So for that reason, the idea is there's a multiverse, and so it doesn't need to be that the universe is teeming with life. And so long as the universe verifies the surprising fact that there are Aleph null people, then that's evidence for then it's not out of accordance with the physics. Though I mean, ultimately, what we discover from physics is largely irrelevant to this stuff, to the anthropic stuff. Okay, someone asks, do I believe in reincarnation? It depends on exactly what you mean. I imagine there are multiple different, lives we had. I think it's probably unlikely that, your past life was in this world, but I think it's probably likely that, experiences like this one, where you're placed into a world and you do various things, occur multiple times, both for anthropic reasons and just for, the reason that if there was a reason to place us in worlds like this once, it's unlikely there'd only be a reason. There'd be a reason only once. Bloop asks, if a lot of atheists accept it, what stops them from following the line of reasoning I offer? I mean, most of them just don't really think about the anthropic argument. The people who do accept SIA and the anthropic argument generally say, when they hear the anthropic argument, generally say it's a good argument, but they're just so confident in atheism for other grounds, they remain an atheist. Okay, Jack Eastling asks what I think of the necessity objection to fine-tuning, that the constants are necessary. First of all, I find it doubtful that they're necessary. I think the way you figure out whether something's possible is you look at whether, you can imagine it being different without entailing a contradiction or anything like that. But I think there's no contradiction or anything like that in the laws of physics being different. Second of all, even if they are necessary, I don't think that positing that something is necessary absolves one of explaining the improbable features of the thing. Imagine that a person got 10 royal flushes in poker. You accuse them of cheating. Their response is, no, it's just necessary that I get 10 royal flushes in poker. No one would find that a remotely convincing explanation. And it's hard to see how this one is different. Or consider if the stars at the starting point of the universe spelled out made by God, nobody would find it to be a good response to say, maybe they necessarily spelled out made by God. Because the point is, there are lots of different things that in an epistemic sense, they might have necessarily spelled out. So it's surprising they spelled that out. So then the puzzle is, why is it that the nature and essence of the universe fixes the cosmological constant to be in this highly narrow range rather than one of the other values? I am not a Catholic, nor am I a Christian. I'm a generic theist. Okay. Now let me go back to explaining why SIA is true. And remember, you're all free to I don't understand what Tiger Sharp is saying or what this has to do with anything. Hey, Jerem. There are a lot of you. There are a whopping 16 people. So American Zombie. The StreamYard link it's in the description. Yeah. So I don't think God needs to be. God, you have so many questions, and so I'll respond to those before I give more arguments for SIA. So you say this is more that positing the full constants are necessary is a better buck stopper than God. I don't think it is because it's so unlikely that the thing the constants would necessarily be is the fine-tuned one, rather than one of the other things they might be. In contrast, God doesn't have a wide range of arbitrary parameters. So it's not like, why does this power fall on this level? All its properties are set to infinity. So it's not surprising why they take on the values that they do, because infinity is a distinctly non-arbitrary number, so you don't require the same degree of fine-tuning. Like if the value of a constant was infinity, nobody would use that as an example of fine-tuning, but needing fine-tuning. But that's what the anthropic people say. Hello, either Spark. Oh, you're like your camera. Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, I don't have a camera, unfortunately.
No worries.
So I don't know about the stuff you said about necessity, the necessity objection. Well, could you just go through the things that you said there? I didn't quite catch it.
So the most important point is that positing that something is necessary is not an explanation of its improbable features. So imagine that the initial conditions of the universe spelled out made by God, or that a person got 30 royal flushes in a row in poker. It wouldn't do to say, oh, maybe it's necessary that they got so many royal flushes, or maybe it's necessary that the universe spells out made by God. That's not a good explanation, because it's extremely unlikely that it would be necessary that the universe spells out made by God rather than one of the other things that it might spell out, or rather than one of the other configurations that the early universe might take on.
So are you saying it's epistemically unlikely, or?
That's right. The most important point is just think about your diagnosis in the made by God case. Whatever you say is going wrong with that argument there, where you say it's not a surprise because it's necessary, I'm going to say is also going wrong here.
I think before that you said something like about conceivability, right? You said it's not inconceivable that the laws of physics could have been different. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Did you say that?
Yeah, so I think conceivability is a guide to possibility, but that was a much less important point. So that was a point about why I don't think the laws of nature are necessary. But the more important one is, even if you grant that they're necessary, this doesn't help you, right? Because it's surprising that they're necessarily this rather than one of the other things that you could imagine them necessarily being.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, your argument has two components. One is like, okay, it being necessary, I don't know, doesn't really make sense. And the second part is something like arbitrary limits, an argument for arbitrary limits. Would that be correct?
No. So the argument is, first of all, they're not necessary as evinced by the conceivability of them being different. Virtually no philosophers have thought that the laws of nature are necessary. Virtually none of the major theories of necessity turn out that they're necessary. And second of all, even if we grant that they're necessary, positing that something is necessarily the case is not an adequate explanation of why it's the case, particularly if it being the case is highly specific and improbable. And the reason for that is that even though the view posits that it's necessary, it's highly unlikely that that would be necessary out of all the things that could be necessary. it could equally have spelled out something different or been on any of an infinite number of other configurations. So it's highly improbable that that particular configuration would be necessary.
Okay, so to the first conceivability point, I understand this wasn't like your main point, but why would it matter if it's inconceivable? Because how I understand it is they're saying the laws of physics could be metaphysically necessary. Why would conceivability act even as a rough guide to metaphysical necessity?
So my view is that ideal conceivability just is the same thing as possibility. Now, we could talk about this. This is a more controversial philosophical view. I have various arguments in favor of it. I think absent this, it's hard to see how you do any modal epistemology. So like consider your judgment that unicorns are possible but non-actual. It's hard to see how you become justified in that if you don't think that you have any modal knowledge. If you don't think a conceivability is a guide to possibility, it's hard to see how you're justified. In the unicorn judgment, it's hard to see how you come to form almost any modal judgment. It also seems like insofar as something is ideally conceivable, but it's not possible, then its impossibility is just brute or unexplained. Where if it's ideally inconceivable, then you can see what's malformed about it. You can see the problem with it and see why it can't be. And so then there's an explanation for its impossibility. But otherwise, you get sort of objectionable bruteness where like you ask, why couldn't the laws of nature be different? I can imagine them being different. And the answer, well, they just can't, stop asking questions. That doesn't feel very satisfactory. But I don't think this is the most productive line because I think the second point is really the much more important one. But I mean, yeah, I guess we could go down this line.
Well, I've got to go now, but maybe I'll call back later because I think it's quite interesting. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, the chat has blown up. Let's see. Okay, I'll last let off with the Catholic comment question. Okay. Yeah, so it's not a better buck stopper than God. Yeah, so I explained why it doesn't need it. Okay, why wouldn't we expect something more obvious, like planets in the same galaxy with persons? I mean, I think this is just the problem of divine hiddenness. I think the problem of divine hiddenness is just a subspecies of the problem of evil. So it's like the problem of evil is why do bad things happen? And I didn't say that glibly, like there are lots of bad things that happen. And people not knowing God is one of the bad things that happens. So I think whatever general explanation you have for why bad stuff happens will explain why people are so ignorant about God. I have various theodicies that I've given over the years. Yeah, I agree. There are Bible contradictions. Yeah, so something can be necessary, but insofar, so like there are some things that are necessary, and once you discover that they're true, then you're no longer surprised by them. But if you merely posit that a thing is necessary before you have like some like proof that it's necessary, then that's not an explanation, right? So that's why it wouldn't do to posit that water is H2O is necessary. It wouldn't do to posit that the universe spelled out made by God necessarily as an explanation, because it's so improbable that it would spell out made by God. So Keeb asks, why shouldn't we thinking? Yeah, we shouldn't thinking. Why shouldn't we think of being born on Earth as analogous to being born in the first room? Wouldn't it be highly unexpected to be an observer on Earth if there are infinite observers? Right, okay, so this is an important clarification to get the note on. So this is right. So imagine there are imagine there are 9 planets. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and let's count Pluto as a planet. And let's imagine that they all have life. SIA wouldn't say that you have anthropic evidence for that state of, it's kind of dark. Is there a way to, I don't know, fix the light? Let's see. SIA wouldn't say you get anthropic evidence. Okay, I don't know, whatever. It doesn't say that you get that you get anthropic evidence that that's true, right? And the idea there is that you don't get anthropic evidence that that's true, because even though it's in some sense likelier that you would exist at all if there are 9 times as many people, it's 9 times less likely that you would exist on Earth. So the theory that only Earth is life permitting doesn't have any disadvantage relative to the theory that Earth and Mars are life permitting. But now suppose that there are 2 Earths. One Earth, there are 2 Earths in different galaxies, and they're physically identical, and they both contain you. Well, now SIA thinks it's twice as likely that you exist in this scenario as if there's only 1 Earth. Because the idea is, so Matt, consider the 2 hypotheses. Hypothesis 1 is there's only 1 Earth. Hypothesis 2 is there are 2 Earths. Well, the odds that you exist on Earth 1 and hypothesis 1 is true equals the odds you'd exist on Earth 1 and hypothesis 2 is true. The odds you'd exist on Earth 1 and hypothesis 2 is true equals the odds you'd exist on Earth 2 and hypothesis 2 is true. And so from those, it follows that the odds that you would exist on Earth, that your existence on Earth is twice as likely on hypothesis 2. Okay. Okay, so Jack Eastling says that, so the bringing up the Kripkean fact was about ideal conceivability not being a guide to possibility. So the idea here is that, and maybe this is getting too far afield, right? Because we're now talking about, Kripke and ideal conceivability and possibility and so on. But anyways, happy to entertain it. But so what Kripke says is he had various cases of discovered a priori, there are these things that are necessary but that we discover, right? So take the judgment that water is H2O. This is necessary. Water couldn't be anything else. But nonetheless, we discovered it empirically. And so there, the idea is that an ideal conceiver couldn't merely, from the armchair, figure out that water is H2O. Some of the facts need to be discoverable. So here, Chalmers has a response to this, where what he says is that we have to distinguish between 2 types of conceivability, primary and secondary. So primary conceivability is the worlds that you could imagine being the actual world. And secondary conceivability is, given the facts as they are, fixed by the actual world, what worlds are possible. So primary conceivability, so consider the world where water is XYZ. So a world where water is XYZ is primarily conceivable in that it might have been the actual world. If we had in the actual world discovered that the chemical thing that makes up water is XYZ rather than H2O, then it would have been the case that water was XYZ. Therefore, the idea is that ideal conceivability is primary conceivability, the world that you could imagine being the actual world, that's a guide to possibility. The important point is that the world that you imagine when you imagine the world with that water as XYZ, that's an actual there's a possible world that's like that. It's just not rightly described as having water, right? So it's not that your imagination that ideal conceivability doesn't tell you which worlds there might be. It's that your ideal conceivability doesn't tell you what things are contained in those worlds, whether in ways where for things whose reference are fixed by the actual world. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Okay, Tiger Shark seems confused. Okay, Carly asks, can you summarize what there were no substantive ones. I think I wrote a blog post about this. Let me see. His main objections were so he has a view of epistemology where he thinks that you can't get evidence for something unless it's a theory that makes predictions in advance. And so then the anthropic argument doesn't make advanced predictions. So he doesn't think you can have evidence for it. Now, this is, flawed for a million reasons. First of all, his view implies that you can't have it implies that we have no evidence for dark matter, or most of the evidence for dark matter isn't real, because most of it has come not from making predictions in advance, but from explaining things that we observe, right? So not like we do an experiment in the lab and we see something, but we like observe something and explain it. I mean, it also implies that, so like the standard version would just imply that you can't do history because history doesn't make testable predictions. Now he had some way of getting around it where he said like he had some way of adding an epicycle to his theory, but even with the epicycle, it had problems. I don't know. I wrote a blog post called "Against T. Jones' Very Crazy Epistemology." You can see that if you want to. Hey Nathan, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm here to defend T-Jump.
Really?
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
Yeah, well, good to see you. Wait, is your background the like Cameron studio?
Yeah, Cameron what Cameron has been doing for a while now. He refuses to talk to me, but he uses my background as a backdrop for his streams. So it's very sort of deceptive what he's doing there. But
that's funny. Yeah. After 10 years of study, I no longer take that background seriously.
Well, I think we're both sick. We potentially have the same flu. I don't know.
Yeah. Maybe when we gave it to each other in person, and then it lay dormant for 3 weeks.
It could. I mean, because we're in a similar sort of geographical area, it could be a similar thing. Maybe it's different though. I've got like a sort of blocked nose and a bit of a cough. I don't know if you've got a cough or anything.
Yes, I have a blocked nose and cough. Yeah. Okay, so what do you want to chat about, Nathan? We could chat about the anthropic argument. It's a beautiful argument.
I mean, I'm happy. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about any of these. To be fair, I do reckon we probably get off in the same place on most of these arguments. You know, like it's going to be that you have a different assessment of some prior probability or what God would do than what I do. I think that's going to be the same for like the fine-tuning argument and the anthropic argument.
Yeah. Well, if that's right, maybe it would be easier to discuss fine-tuning because like it's sort of a simpler argument, right? So if you're having basically the same objections to both.
I like to discuss the your version of the anthropic argument as well. I think.
Yeah, sounds good.
I don't agree with I think I've got an issue with the self-indication assumption, but I haven't particularly thought about
heresy.
What it is as well.
Outrageous.
Yeah.
Wow. See, I mean, this is why Cameron's right to not engage with a guy like you who rejects the SIA, an SIA rejecting scoundrel.
So what was it that led you to believe in the SIA to begin with? Like, what's been your sort of chain of thinking around this? Like, you've kind of gone down a path, right, and then thinking about these anthropic things.
Okay, so so the story of me and SIA, it began in my childhood. No, it didn't.
When I flipped a coin and then I looked around and there was a pile of coins around that were being flipped.
Yeah. So it began. So I at one point, like 2 years ago, had an argument called the anthropic argument against being a brain in a vat, where I made a pretty simple argument against being a brain in a vat, which was sorry. So the anthropic argument against being a brain in a vat, the idea is like, so suppose that you're a brain in a vat. Well, there are two options. Option one is there are a bunch of different vats, but then the theory is very, very complicated. You need some explanation for the bunch of different vats. You know, a million vats don't just pop into being out of nothing. What makes this vats so special? So then the theory is bad. And the other theory is maybe there is just one vat. And then the theory is a bit more parsimonious. But if there's just a single vat, then it's highly unlikely that I would be there, right? So I made this argument. And I wrote a blog post about it, and I told it to a friend, and he said, "Oh, this assumes the self-indication assumption." And I was like, "Whoa, I don't know what that is." And so we talked about it briefly. I think that was when I first heard about it. Then later, when I was an atheist, I wrote a post steel-manning theism. And I'd sort of forgotten that the SIA was controversial, or that that's what SIA said or something. And so I wrote one of the arguments I made over the course of 3 sentences actually I don't remember the exact length. It may have been that by the time the post came out, I'd added more, but the first one, I just thought, this was sort of a simple point. Was the idea was just theism probably predicts more people existing than atheism, so it makes your existence likelier. And this just seemed like a pretty straightforward instance of reasoning.
So you think that that thought came to you before the sort of the Beth 2 self-indication assumption stuff? I don't know. I'd actually be interested where Beth 2 came from as well. But
right between Beth 1 and Beth 3.
Well, it just seems like a very, very specific claim. But yeah, so it was that intuition that God would make more people than if there wasn't a God or something was before the full-blown sort of
right version. Well, so this was how I first thought of SIA, but my friend told me, this is a view called the self-indication assumption, and it's controversial. And so then I started looking into it. I started looking into the Sleeping Beauty problem, and at this time, remember, I was still an atheist. I was still pretty a very confident atheist, the self-indication assumption, it just seemed obviously right to me, and it seemed obviously right. To a kind of insane degree, where people would present the counterexamples and they would just seem supporting examples. They present the presumptuous philosopher case. And I was it seemed perfectly intuitive to me. So that's how I first came across it. Then I read a lot about it, and then I became convinced.
Yeah. So, there's obviously both sort of steps.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can answer your question about Beth 2.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Right. So Beth 2 it's not I think we can get more the conclusion with high probability there are more than Beth 2 people. I don't think that it needs to be limited to Beth 2. But I think so. The basic argument for there being at least Beth 2 people is, suppose that you think that there are space-time points, which is or at the very least that there are possible space-time points. Well, they're going to be on the number line. There are going to be, in a line, there are going to be Beth 1 points, right? Because points are arbitrarily small. And it turns out that the number of ways to rearrange Beth 1 points is Beth 2, because it's a number of rearrangements of Beth 1, and the number of rearrangements is just the number of subsets, so it's Beth 2. And this is a point David Lewis, this was an insight David Lewis had, where he was making the case there are Beth 2 distinct possible worlds. Now, you get more if you think the worlds can duplicate, but if you think that the worlds can't duplicate, then you still get Beth 2.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, formally, what you're saying about taking power sets and combinatorics and stuff that's going to be right, but I don't know that I agree with reading the sort of metaphysics off of possibility that you do. I don't think of possible worlds like you do, but we don't have to have. I was thinking this as well when you were just talking before about the 2D semantics stuff as well, where I just kind of don't think about possibility in that sense. But I don't think it's going to be too important for the argument. So there's the 2 steps, right? You've got the first step, which is the self-indication assumption, and then the second step is the God would be more likely to produce Beth 2 people.
Yeah. The argument goes there are Beth 2 people. Beth 2 people existing is the byproduct of either design, chance, or necessity.
Yeah. So I guess I don't have one problem is going to be that for me.
Yeah. Hey, how you guys doing?
Good, thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah, I saw that you had something about the you said you used to be.
Wait, sorry. Nathan was. He was.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no.
It's okay.
Sorry. Good.
Yeah, I guess what one problem for me is going to be, as I said, just a difference in our sense of what God would do or have reason to do. And, for me, producing sort of Beth two people and that type of like possible world metaphysics, Beth two people distributed across different possible worlds and things isn't really one of them. So,
well, not distributed against different possible worlds, against different actual worlds.
Well, it depends on what we're sort of like
different spatiotemporally disconnected, like
but that's what I mean is I think like maybe you disagree about this, but you might think that God is able to sort of make different types of metaphysics true, right? So you might think that of the things that God could even vary different models of metaphysical modality being true, right? Because there are different kind of accounts of metaphysical modality, and you might think that that's one of the things that could vary in terms of if you're going with bare theism and what it predicts or something. Like, for example, I don't know if you'd say that David Lewis's particular account of possible worlds follows from theism or something. Like, you'd say maybe you would say would you say theism would be consistent with sort of like possible world anti-realism or something, or possible worlds is just a way of talking or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think theism is consistent with anti-realism about possible. I mean, you shouldn't be an anti-realist about possible worlds, but if
I know they're different. Yeah, I know you're going to disagree with that, but I mean, it's not like
right.
it's
but I guess, if you have that view, I think you could still be a theist. I mean, I think SIA. So like, there are different versions of SIA. One of them holds you should think a larger share of possible people exists, and the other one holds that you should think that just like the more people that exists, the likelier our existence is. So it doesn't matter the share; it just matters the total number. I find the second version more plausible, and if you like the second version, then you can make the argument go without reference to the number of possible people. And I think the first version in its naive form is kind of unworkable, because it implies that like, suppose that like necessitarianism is true and there are like 7 people. It implies that SIA loves this worldview, but SIA of course should not love the worldview on which necessitarianism is true and there are 7 people. And you can also show how that view, if you bite the bullet on loving necessitarianism plus there being 7 people, then that implies all the SIA reductios about like you get high confidence in results of a fair unflipped coin.
So I'm kind of interested in how you'd answer this question then. If we sort of fix what we know about the actual world, right? Is there an observation that you could make that wouldn't be evidence of like some indicating assumption? So obviously, like with the self-indication,
what?
Yes, of some indication assumption. So what I've just kind of made this up on the spot. So, but basically, the observation of any event, right? There's going to be some non-one probability that event came about. And given the framework that you're applying to the self-indication assumption, if you sort of say that there's, some infinite number of possible worlds where all the different outcomes happen, well, then that's going to statistically predict that observation better than, some rival model where we don't have all of those. So would basically every observation count as evidence of this theory in your view? Like flipping a coin, my existence, seeing someone cross the road, seeing a bird go left rather than right. Like, is every observation that you make confirmatory evidence of possible world maximalism or something?
Well, certainly not every observation confirm. So, okay, first of all, I don't think every possible state of affairs gets created by God. It's like there's a possible world where just 10 billion people being tortured. I don't think God makes that one because it's bad. And I don't even think, what I think God does is he creates every possible person and then places them in the best sort of world for them. So, okay, not every possible world exists. Second of all, even putting that aside, obviously not every additional observation, like your existence gives you evidence for theism, but like your additional observations, they don't give you additional evidence. So it's not like you see a squirrel and your credence in theism goes up, because theism doesn't.
So this is what I'm wondering though, is, you know, like
it doesn't affect the relative odds that you would see a squirrel. Now, in terms of the point about, okay, but like, is it the case that in nearly all cases, finding myself existing in a world gives me evidence for theism? So I'd say the answer is yes. And you might think that's kind of suspicious, but like, so my view is that your existence is the sort of thing that's really, really improbable if there's no God, and probable if there is a God. And so it's not suspicious for it to give you strong evidence for God, just like your existence gives you strong evidence that you have parents or something, because it's more like most people have parents. The most likely ways that you get people are with parents. There's nothing like it's not it like doesn't violate the conservation of evidence in an objectionable way any more than thinking your existence gives you parents, or that there's a hospitable universe and so on does.
If we just stick to like the first sort of stage of the argument, just because I mean I've got some issues I think with that second stage inference as well, but I'm like really interested in, from your point of view,
just to be clear, the first stage, by the first stage, you mean the like there are
the SIA premise? Yeah, like the SIA premise. Yeah. Like, so tell me if I've got the sort of form of the reasoning that you're applying here wrong, right? But it's like, okay, my existence is like a specific type of person, and then that's really strongly statistically predicted. If you know, you can ask the question, why am I me rather than some other way? And one explanation of that really strongly statistically predicts it, in fact, with a probability of 1, is every possible arrangement exists, right? And so that's why you get that. That's why you then believe that that's the correct explanation, because it so strongly predicts your existence. Is that right or wrong? Or do you want to?
So that is like a sort of core intuition that lots of people have. That a lot of people like. This was sort of like the first thought I had that kind of like motivated SIA, where it just seemed like, you know, if loads of people exist, it seems likelier that I would exist. But I don't think this is sort of like it's a very like flat-footed argument. It's not really going to be convincing for people who are not inclined to accept SIA. So this isn't really the argument for SIA, but it's an argument along the lines of, you know, when you just look out into the world, do you not see the presence of God? Like, it might be a reason why lots of people are convinced that there's a God, but it's not the sort of thing that convinces them. So let me give you 2 arguments that I think should convince you of SIA. I'll give you one, and then I
just wanted to check if that intuition was right, because I've got like that. I've seen you introduce this to people as well with like the coin flip example, where you say, you know, if I flip a coin and it comes up tails, well, that's more strongly predicted. If there's like the fact that we observe a tails coming up is strongly predicted by lots and lots of tail flips happening, sort of like in different places, or in some sense. I'm not exactly sure exactly how you'd specify that, but that's one of the ways you introduce this to people, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm wondering is, when you observe any event other than your existence that you might think sort of epistemically is somewhat improbable, maybe, you know, a coin flip, okay, it's something like 50-50, but you know, me joining your stream today, or I don't know, a leaf falling outside your window rather than it not falling at that time or something, there's going to be some kind of random variable associated with its fall or something. What I'm wondering is, why in those cases are you not making the inference to, you know, all kinds of actually existing possible worlds with all of the outcomes, such that these improbable things that you're experiencing are strongly predicted by those observations, strongly predict those observations that you're making?
I see. So the idea is something like, imagine we observe something improbable, like, you know, Fred winning the lottery. Well, on the supposition that there are a bunch of different worlds, then Fred's guaranteed to win the lottery. Or, suppose we observe some improbable galaxy formation on the supposition that there are lots of different possible worlds. There are going to be different galaxies. Okay, so the answer there, and it'll be, so there's a sense in which I think you should do that. So what SIA says is that what matters is the number of people that you might presently be, right? So you should think that there are lots and lots of people who are your evidential duplicates, in the sense that you can't rule out yourself being them based on what you currently know, right? So there are going to be lots and lots of different Nathans throughout the multiverse with your exact experiences. So for that reason, if you have an experience of something, you should think that other things that trigger that experience are peppered all throughout the multiverse, right? So in that sense, you should follow the reasoning. Now, but you might wonder, like, okay, so suppose I see, I see a chair. This is a very specific chair. It's made up of a very large number of specific atoms. Now, suppose that we posit that there are, like, space is just filled with chairs, just littered with chairs. Well, then that makes it likely that likelier that this chair would exist, right? That a chair would have such and such properties. So there, I don't think the inference goes through. And the reason is that what you have to be precise about is your total evidence, which is this chair exists and is seen by me. So maybe it's true that a chair with such and such components existing is likelier if there are more chairs, but it doesn't actually raise the odds that it would be seen by you. Now, there might be circumstances in which it does raise the odds, like if the world had only 2 chairs, it's pretty unlikely you would see them. But absent it raising the odds of you seeing the chair, SIA won't get an update.
So in that case, you wouldn't make the inference that space in the actual world is sort of filled with, chairs or similar chairs. But would you not still, or would you still make the inference that there are many possible worlds where you come across counterpart chairs very similarly, and because the multiverse is packed out with counterpart chairs, that's what statistically predicts you seeing this chair very, very well. So would that the point I'm making is that even that observation would still be some evidence in favor of the sort of like multiverse, or whatever you want to kind of call this modal realism view.
No,
Okay.
It's not evidence for the multiverse.
Or the modal realism, sorry. It's
not evidence for modal realism. The fact that you have some experience that informs what you think there are many possible worlds that are like doesn't mean that it gives you evidence for the presence of possible worlds. And and if you sort of work out on pen and paper the math, then you end up getting no update in favor of the universe being bigger. Of there being more people just from having more experiences. So like, let's see. So let's try to.
Yeah, because I'm sort of, when you say that then makes me unsure why my existence is an update in favor if these other experiences aren't. Like, I guess I would see it. I'm still seeing it as like consistently applying in both cases. So maybe. Yeah, you can see something there, or I can't.
I see. Wait, okay. So your question is like, why is it that? So the idea is like your existence on SIA gives you evidence that there are more people, but your having some experience doesn't give you evidence that there are. Your existence gives you evidence that there's a multiverse, but your having extra experiences doesn't give you evidence that there's a multiverse.
I see. Yes. Oh, sorry to interrupt. You got carry on. I thought you.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
So yeah, it's something like, I see there being. I can't see what the difference is between the piece of evidence I exist and the piece of evidence some probabilistic event occurred, right? Whereby I would make the inference to modal realism for the piece of evidence that I exist, based on the fact that it strongly statistically predicts this particular outcome happening. But I wouldn't in the case of any other piece of evidence that I got. You know, I can't see what the thing is that's supposed to be the different, like, why would I only do it for myself but then not for other things?
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So the basic idea is that it's borrowing from the same basic bit of data. So in the case where of you merely exist versus you exist and have such and such properties, I agree you get an update from you exist and have such and such properties, but the idea is that you have, like, give the conditional probability of you having such and such properties, given that you exist, is no higher given the multiverse theory than given the single universe theory, right? So if there are more people, it's likelier that you would exist, but it's not likelier, given that you exist, that you would have various properties.
Well, it depends what you mean by you exist, I guess, right? It depends how many of those properties you stipulate in that.
Right. Well, so you don't have to like do some like shenanigans, right? So let's just define your existence up until the point as, you know, you being, you know, that guy with the experiences that you've had up until that point. The multiverse. So the multiverse. So consider the first moment of your existence. Well, the multiverse raises the probability of that happening, but then conditional on the first moment happening, it doesn't raise the relative probability of any of the other moments happening.
The other moments, you mean the ones that will come afterwards?
That's right.
It doesn't raise the probability of any of those happening.
Right, so
that's interesting.
So, like, suppose you have 10. So, suppose you have a very short life. You have 10 experiences of just seeing a red wall. Well, the odds that you would exist to see a red wall are higher if there are more people that exist to see a red wall. But the odds that given that you have seen the first red wall, the conditional odds that you'd see the next red wall is totally unaffected by the multiverse. Now, I think it might be I
don't know if I think that's right, because so your idea is then almost that you evaluate the next moment against you sort of like constrain it to the actual world at that point.
Right. The idea is that the only reason, and sorry, Max, I realize we're like, you know, completely shut you out, but the idea is that the relative probability, if you're updating on some evidence, you look at the relative probability on the evidence given some other facts.
So you're saying because...
And so the other facts are the ones you have in the background, and once you update on your existence, the other facts won't give you any evidence, because of course you already know.
So this is what I'm wondering. So you're saying that first observation is such strong. Maybe you're not saying this. This is like I'm asking you. Like, are you saying that first observation so strongly confirms the modal realism that you're then 100% certain, such that no subsequent observation can raise the probability any further?
Oh no, that's not what I was saying. What I was saying was that I mean, something in the vicinity of that might be right, but what I was saying was that so it's likelier that you would exist if there are more people, but given that you exist, it's not likelier that you would have any property. So, like, suppose, like, you have a cat. Do you have a cat?
No, I don't have a cat actually, but my brother's got a cat.
You have a hat. That's better. So you have a hat. So if in a bigger universe, it's likely that you would exist. But given that you exist, it's no likelier that you would have a hat, right? It's not like, well, the Nathans that exist are likelier to have hats. Like, suppose there are two theories. One theory says there's only one Nathan. The other theory says that there are, 10 bazillion Nathans. The percentage of them that have hats is not affected by the number of universes in the multiverse. Sorry, I think we should talk to Max because I'll like answer Max's question and then I'll go happy to go back to Jen.
No worries. Just to say where I was kind of going with that, right? So I'm not 100% seeing the difference yet, but then what I was wondering, maybe I'm wrong at that point, but then I was thinking what observations would count against the kind of inference that you're making then? Because if that step that you're making doesn't go through, it seems like every single observation counts in favor of your theory, and then I don't know what an observation that counts as evidence against it would look like, right? And that's kind of overall what I was thinking. If you want to come back to it though, because we seem to be that point, it seems to be a little bit kind of I'm happy to chat about that more later, but let's answer Max's question first.
Sure. I was wondering, do you believe in a religious type of God or deity, or just a creator, that life was created by some deity? Is it like a specific type of deity, like religious, or just a creator?
So it's a bit of a mix between the two. So I believe there is a being that's all powerful, all good, all loving, that's morally perfect and so on. But I don't believe that it's the sort of being that, for example, is described in the Bible and resurrected a Jew in first century Rome and Palestine, that was also itself, or, shared a being with itself.
So you're not religious. You're just saying, look, something, what I look at scientifically as life on Earth, that it couldn't have been happened by chance, that something had to create this.
Yeah, sort of. I mean, my argument is not primarily about the improbability of life on Earth arising by chance. It's more about kind of broad features like the anthropic evidence about the fact that you exist, fine-tuning, psychophysical harmony, which Nathan loves and made a 12-hour stream talking about his love of psychophysical harmony.
So you don't find any scientific evidence that contradicts the theory of evolution?
No.
Okay. Because I've been a science researcher for over 20 years, and there's multiple accounts of that. I mean, I do streams on it, on American Zombie. And, when you look at, I don't know if you guys have ever read 1984 with Doublethink and Doublespeak and Newspeak.
Well, hang on. Well, I'm interested in the first thing that you said. Mm-hmm. When you said evidence that contradicts the theory of evolution, could you kind of maybe articulate what you mean there? I say that just because, as you're aware, there's a lot of different sort of theories of evolution, right? And people believe
I would think that there's one that's spread into the others that are non-observable. So if you look at chemistry or physics, you can demonstrate observable science, empirical science right there. Evolution deals without that. It's like they also change words. Homology, the definition, if you look at the words and the etymology, is the study, the ology of similarities. Now that has been changed to say, oh no, it's the study of a common ancestor. Now, common ancestor does not exist. It's a non-existent common ancestor, or a non-existent species. And when you say it that way, that's the scientific way. Missing link implies that something exists, but it just hasn't been found. That's not scientific. The scientific term is a non-existent transitional species.
Yeah,
very important for this.
We could talk about this, but I feel like, why accept evolution? I think the evidence for it is good, and I've sort of done some loose reading about it.
Like evidence, I'd like to know, because I don't see any.
Well, hold on. Let me finish the sentence. It's not my field of expertise, and so I would feel kind of like a novice talking about it. When there's a subject that I don't know that much about, I try for it to not talk about it publicly. I might, maybe write a brief article about it, but I wouldn't want to do debates about it. So I think I'm not going to speak publicly about evolution, but yeah, I would encourage you to, like, I don't know, have a debate with someone who knows about the subject. I think Nathan's friend James, I think, is very informed about it. So maybe talk with that guy. I think.
Yeah, I've spoken with many people, scientists themselves, that cannot get published because they'll lose their funding. They've actually changed biologists to evolutionary biologists. Tyranny stems from language. It's not just the barrel of the gun. When you start to convince people that this word means something else,
okay.
So this is where it goes back to.
Yeah, sorry. I don't, this stream, the idea was to talk about the anthropic argument, fine-tuning and psychophysical harmony. I don't want it to turn into an evolution stream.
Yeah, no, I understand. But now entropy as well.
Sorry, you're going through, like you say, I understand, and then you're like,
well, I'm just saying that, doesn't physics show that you can beat that? We just don't know how. Like when you alter certain human genes and, projecting into the future to say, okay, if we could solve this, this, and this, then a person could live longer. The fact that we do see things in society that diminish the lifespan of people. I mean, the pollution, the certain foods that are being.
Yeah, sorry, Max. Sorry.
No, and I understand this is not your expertise. You guys can just go ahead with your thing. But I was curious if it was based on anything scientific on why you believe what you believe.
Okay, lovely. Okay. Yeah, sorry, Nathan. So the anthropic argument. Where were we? So I don't. You're muted, by the way.
Yeah. I can. So it was like I still wasn't kind of with you on, I guess, understanding what the difference is between the evidence. So you gave this example of like someone who has 10 experiences and they look at like a red, that they just see a red wall for 10 moments in time as like an idealization or something. And so you were saying like that first moment of experience, there's like some updating to be done. And the updating is like, I exist, and that's strongly predicted by modal realism. Therefore, I kind of should, my evidence, my that's confirmation of modal realism. Let's put it that way. But then after that point, it's not. Say I come to observe a second red moment. The fact that I observe the new evidence that I have, the second moment is a red experience or something. That isn't confirmation of modal realism in the same way. And I guess I wasn't understanding why that is the case. Yeah. So yeah.
So suppose the only data you had was there exists at least after you have some experience, right? So you see a red wall or something. Suppose the only data you had was there exists at least one person who had the experience of seeing a red wall. Well, then of course you would get evidence for modal realism. The probability that at least one person would have the experience of for any combination of experiences is higher on modal realism than on other theories. So inevitably, after having some experiences, you would update. The reason you don't update on a modal realist-like theory is that the modal realist-like theory does not raise the relative likelihood that it doesn't raise the relative likelihood that you would have certain if your only data was such and such experiences were had somewhere by someone, then you would get evidence. But your data, your more specific data is, I have such and such experiences. So the odds that you would exist is higher given theism than given what you're calling modal realism, but just some big multiverse.
Yeah. Call it whatever you.
Modal realism's fine. So given modal realism, the odds that you would exist are much higher. But conditional on your existence, it's no likelier that you would have any particular experience.
Conditional on your experience, it's no likelier that you would have any
conditional on your existence, right? So let's take an example of a thing that you think might be evidence. So suppose I 5 minutes from now eat an apple. You're saying that would be evidence for modal realism by my logic. What can't be evidence?
Yeah, I can see the same argument working for it. Yeah, is
what can't be modal? It can't be evidence for modal realism, because the probability that I would eat an apple 5 minutes from now, given modal realism, is just as high as the probability given the falsity of modal realism. Like, suppose if you're betting on whether or not I'm going to eat an apple right now, if you're making bets on that,
Yeah.
knowing that modal realism is true would not inform your bets in the slightest.
I see what you're saying. So you're saying knowing modal realism is true, and we're in the actual world. Yeah. So it would only. Yeah. So I don't think that.
So you're saying we should reorganize our society along the lines of the lobster?
No, I'm saying. I think you're right that modal realism, the form of inference, isn't predictive, right? I don't think that as an explanation, but when we're doing like retrospective probabilities, which is what we're doing in Bayesianism, where we already have the evidence, I do think that then the inference still works backwards, right, to modal realism. So I'd agree with you that modal realism isn't gonna predict forward what will happen. But I
mean, just the general tenet of Bayes is that if you observe some evidence, the way that you figure out the likelihood whether that evidence is if you observe some event, the way you figure out whether it's evidence for a theory is you look at whether, were you to not know the event had happened, and then you would think that the event was likelier to happen if the theory is true than if the theory was false.
I might be able to. So let's. I think I can clarify the point, right? Maybe. It'll just be 1 second though to kind of set it up. Because we've got a bunch of crap in this thing that I need to sort of clear out. So if I'm gonna get my stick man. I'll put my stick man here. Right, and we've got moment 1. Is that your computer making noises? It's not mine, right?
Yeah, I think it's mine.
So we've got CRAD.
Wait, sorry. Are you intending to share your screen or something?
If that's okay, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's fine. I'm just saying I currently can't see it.
Oh yeah. Don't worry. I'm still setting it up. So just one. I mean, I can share it with you, but
yeah, you can't swatch how it's made.
So what are we calling it? Probability of modal realism. That's what MR can be given. E equals R prior times probability of the evidence given modal realism all over our probability of the evidence, right? And then we're going to do the same for time 2, right? So the relevant facts in each case are that I'm seeing red and I know it's a different moment in time or something like that, right?
Wait, sorry. I guess okay. Probability of modal realism given the evidence equals the probability of modal realism times the probability. Yeah, okay. Wait, sorry. How are the diagrams different?
Yeah, let me just. So this is. Let me specify. This is E1, right? And this is E2. So E1 E1 equals I am seeing red and it is T1, and then E2 is basically similar except it's the second moment, right? So there's two different pieces of evidence with different content, right? That, or you, I guess you could rephrase it like, my experience at the first point of time is seeing red, and then there's a second claim. My experience at the second moment in time is seeing red, because obviously, there's going to be sort of nearby possible worlds, as you would say, which include, C green or whatever. Let me. But we are not in those sort of possible worlds. Instead, we're in this is the actual world. So in the first case, I think that this is what you're saying. You're saying.
Sorry, I guess I'm confused. What's the third diagram? The one below.
Oh yeah, sorry. This is just to demonstrate the notion of possible worlds, I guess. So this is all time 2, and then that's this is another possible world where I'm seeing green in this one, or maybe I see blue in a third possible world or something. Same for.
I see. Okay, so those represent the different things that might happen at T2.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we're on board at.
Are you really an artist?
I think we're on board at the first one, right?
Yeah.
So we update, and we get some strong evidence of like this is what you're saying happens, and what we do at the first point, right?
Yeah. Well, and no, the reason that you update isn't because of anything about what's happening during the first moment. So the important thing is not that you're seeing red, it's that you exist, right? So the existence is the important bit, and then the seeing red isn't the thing that gives you evidence. But because conditional on your existence, modal realism doesn't raise the likelihood of you seeing red.
So could you, if you set aside the I exist thing, could you first consider this piece of evidence?
Could you first consider what?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is,
I guess I wasn't sure which piece of evidence you meant by this.
Well, I guess yeah. What I'm saying is, what's the reason that we have to consider the evidence in some particular order? Would be a question.
Well, I wasn't saying that you have to consider the evidence in some particular order.
Because if we don't have to consider the evidence in any particular order, then we should be able to consider this piece of evidence first, right? Like this is a piece of evidence that we have, that it's time 1 and we're seeing red, and we can consider that prior to considering, our total evidence that we have at T1, which may also include other claims, right? Does include other claims.
Wait, sorry. I guess, yeah, you can consider that you exist at time 1 and are seeing red.
Yeah, I'm not saying you can't. I'm just saying that in terms of the order in which you consider that evidence, there's no or maybe there is. I can't see a reason why we would have to consider the evidence in one particular order rather than another.
Yeah, I agree. I don't care what order you consider the evidence.
So suppose at time 1 we're in this true state of ignorance where we've not we've got a true pure prior or something like that, right? And then we've got this observation that we see red, and it's time 1, but we've not yet done any updating on the fact that we exist at this first moment in time. Could we update in this way to have evidence in favor of modal realism at that point?
Okay, so you realize you're seeing red without being aware that you exist. And then the question is, would that be evidence for modal realism?
And remember, you have you've got all the nearby possible worlds, like the ways it could have been at time 1, and you're just considering this one piece of evidence here.
I mean, yeah, I guess in that case, then you would update on the fact that you're seeing red, right? Because I guess it's more likely that you'd be seeing red at time 1 than that you would not be seeing red at time 1. It may not be coherent to not update to update on your seeing red without taking into account the fact that you exist. But okay, but sure, even if barring questions of whether that's ruled out, it is. Sure, you can. Then you'll get an update from that.
So there's a second. There is this second piece of evidence, and I don't mean to ignore that. I know you're not making this point exactly. You're saying, okay, there's also this piece of evidence at time 1. I exist, right? And so I update. I'm calling that E3 just because it's come in third in the model. But let's say we update on that as well, and that would similarly be evidence in favor of modal realism here, right?
That you exist?
Yeah.
Are we
Like
holding
that-
the background that at T1 you had the experience of seeing red?
We're still in T1, so we're just like we're assuming that we're
Right.
sort of.
So do we have anything else that we've already updated on?
Just this thing. So just the I am seeing red and it's T1.
Oh,
So
then that you exist gives you no evidence either way, because the conditional probability of you existing, given that you've seen red and it is T1, given modal realism, is exactly the same as the conditional probability that you've seen red and it was T1, given the falsity of modal realism.
Wait, hang on. Could you just repeat that? Sorry, I missed. So that the conditional probability,
So the idea is we've already updated on the fact that you see red at T1.
Yeah.
But whether or not modal realism is true, given that you see red at T1, you must exist at T1. So the conditional probability, given that you see red at T1, of you existing at T1 is just the same between modal realism and not modal realism.
That's interesting because so the first thing that we did, are you saying that we just can't update on the evidence of seeing red and it being T1 without first updating on the fact that I exist?
No, what I'm saying, so there are lots of cases. I mean, maybe I would say that, but that's not the point I'm making.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that there are lots of cases where you have okay, so consider the hypothesis that I eat Skittles today. And let's say I eat a bag of 15 Skittles, right? Well, so upon eating the first Skittle, that gives me a major update in favor of the theory. I now think it's way more likely. The second Skittle doesn't affect my credence at all, because I was already at 1 on the theory that I ate 15 Skittles today. Now, if you could update in a different order. So you could say, well, let's update on the second one, and then that confirms it, and then update on the first one, and then you don't, and then you look at the probability of that condition on the second one, and then the first one wouldn't give you an update. You can, so long as you switch around the order in which you're counting evidence, the extent to which you update based on some evidence will change to a great degree, right? So in this case, if you switch around to updating on the fact that you exist, the fact that you're having some experience at some time before you update on the fact that you exist, well, then the fact that you're having the experience at the time, that'll give you lots of evidence for that fact will be the one that gives you lots of evidence for modal realism. It's not, but then that you exist, given that won't give you any evidence for modal realism.
So I think what's happening in the Skittles example that you gave is that, so you've got the hypothesis, I will eat Skittles at some point today, right? And then after you've eaten one Skittle, you're 100% confident that hypothesis is true. So, it's got a probability of 1. And so it's not confirmed by any further observations. And I think that's the reason why the further observations don't do anything to increase your confidence. Whereas in this case, I'm not sure. Maybe to put it as a question rather than to say what I think is, is it the case that we're 100% confident in modal realism in a similar way after updating once, such that it changes the way that we assess further evidence down the line?
Well, okay, so no. I mean, first of all, you should be 100. Granting SIA, you should be 100% certain.
I know, yeah, I get, but just in the case,
I don't think that's material, because we could make the example work by switching around the numbers. So okay, so here's a case, an analogous Skittles case. So let's imagine that there's some lottery where it has 75% chance of payout if I eat 1 Skittle, and 90% chance of payout if I eat 2 Skittles. And I eat a red skittle, and then a blue skittle. Well, once you update on me having eaten the blue skittle, without updating on me having eaten the red skittle, then you'll conclude that the odds of me winning the lottery are 75%. When you conclude that I've eaten the red skittle, then you update. Then you conclude that the odds I'll win the lottery are 90%. Now, if you switch around the order, where you say first we update on eating the red skittle and then eating the blue skittle, then you conclude that it's the blue skittle that gives you the bigger update, or sorry, the red skittle that gives you the bigger update. So in short, the order in which you update on evidence determines how big the update is that you get from individual bits of evidence. Or this is just very common when it comes to the existence of God. So suppose that, we have a bunch of different arguments for God. So there's the fine-tuning argument, and there's the psychophysical harmony argument, and so on. Let's suppose that you think all these are really good arguments, but axiarchism slays them all. Well, then the first bit of evidence that you update on, that'll give you a lot of evidence, right? Because it knocks out all the non-axiarchist views. But the second one wouldn't give you much evidence at all because you've already knocked out all the non-axiarchist views, and so then it'll just shrink the share of the probability space by a very small amount.
Yeah, I'm not 100% following what you're saying, I think. So maybe you can kind of help to spell it out for me. So we've got two sort of things that happen, right? So we've got E1 or not E1, and then there's a second event that's going to happen. So, in the examples you gave, these were either arguments, or there was skittles and then winning the lottery or not winning the lottery. So then you were saying that we know one of these outcomes or something happens. Is that the claim? I didn't really follow.
Wait, sorry. I think the God example is better than the Skittles example.
Okay, sure. So the God example.
Sorry, I feel bad saying that after you drew your beautiful Skittles.
It's graph. Okay. Well, it's okay because I think the same principle should hold in the sense of, we have some piece of evidence which might be one argument, right? And then we have either E2 or not E2 in, against the backdrop of E1 having happened, or we have E2 or not E2 against the backdrop of not E1 having happened. And then you were saying that we know we're in one of the spaces where E2 and E1 happens or something, or what?
Okay, so the idea is that the sole point is you seem to be suggesting that there's something sort of weird about the how much, which one you get determines the update being depending on the order in which you do the update. But my point is this is just a totally normal update. So let's imagine that two data points, theism and psychophysical harmony. Fine-tuning and psychophysical harmony.
Yeah, so we can consider this one to be fine-tuning, right? And we can consider this one to be psychophysical.
And let's imagine that just by far the best response to both is axiarchism. Okay, so updating on the first one, then the first one has tons of force, right? It blows all the non-axiarchist views out of the water. So it massively raises your credence. But the second one will have very little force because now the overwhelming majority of your non-theistic probability space is in axiarchism.
So hang on. So are you saying that what we're now assessing is also given axiarchism and versus not?
No, I'm not saying we're not taking axiarchism in the background. I'm just saying we're talking about the best response to fine-tuning, right? So suppose that the best response to fine-tuning is axiarchism. It's the best naturalistic explanation of fine-tuning. Well, after updating on fine-tuning, now you should think, okay, conditional on atheism, axiarchism is pretty likely. But if you think that conditional on atheism, axiarchism is pretty likely, and then introducing a new problem solved by axiarchism won't have that much force. So in other words, it's not which argument here will have more evidential force, which one will give you a bigger Bayes factor, will depend simply on the order in which you present them.
Okay, so we consider atheism, then not atheism. Oh God, where the hell does that come from? That can go away. That can go here. So we've got all of this stuff going on. We consider atheism, then not atheism. And then we consider axiarchism or not axiarchism. And you're saying, obviously, we do this for each of the branches. And then you're saying that, there's a probability, right, on the end of each of these. Like, this outcome is going to be the probability.
Sorry, Nick, I feel like the point I'm making is kind of basic and it doesn't need a drawing. The point is just the order in which you update on evidence will determine which evidence gives you a bigger Bayes factor.
Well, this is sort of what I'm trying to get at, right? So there's all the possible combinations of the evidence at the end of each branch. But then I think that what you're saying is that in the case of the branches looking like this, where we have this here, like, tell me if this isn't what you're saying, but and obviously just fill in the gaps for these other branches, that this probability here of fine tuning and atheism and axiarchism, you're saying that this is actually a different value. Or that's what I'm taking you to be saying. Have I misunderstood?
Wait, I'm saying that the probability of fine-tuning and atheism and axiarchism is different from the probability.
Yeah, because you're saying
an atheism and axiarchism. Why?
Right. Yes.
Why would it be different from itself?
Exactly. This is why I'm not following what you've said.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I know. Yeah. Maybe if I explain why I think that's what you're saying, and then you can tell me where I've got this wrong. Right. Is that so? There's an event, right, in each of these spaces where so each of these branches adds up to 1. So this is the probability of atheism conditional on fine tuning. This is the probability of axiarchism conditional on atheism and fine tuning, right? This is the probability of atheism given axiarchism and fine tuning. This is probability of axiarchism given fine tuning. Would it be because there's another branch, fine tuning, atheism?
So what I'm saying is it might be like here's like a sample of how it works. Maybe so suppose you count so you're conditioning on atheism. Now suppose you count fine tuning first. Suppose you think that gives you a 5-1 update against atheism. And then you count psychophysical harmony. Then that gives you a 2-1 update against atheism.
Right.
Okay.
So
now suppose you count it the other way, where first you count psychophysical harmony. That gives you a 5-1 update against atheism. Then you count fine tuning. That gives you a 2-1 update against atheism. In that case, the probabilities work out the same, but so the overall probabilities of atheism given fine tuning and psychophysical harmony end up the same depending on how you measure it. But the degree of the update from fine tuning specifically will differ.
Yes, so I see what you're saying. Yeah. The degree of the update from fine tuning will differ if that's the second piece of evidence that comes along. Yeah, I get what you're saying. So it wouldn't actually be different at the end. It would be that if this were here, then that's a different probability to it being here. Yeah, I agree with that. And then so let's now loop it back to this case, right? So in this case, what you're saying is the order that we consider it in does matter, but even though at the end of the day, right, what we believe is still, what we're considering overall is the probability of modal realism given, I am seeing red, and it is T1, and I exist. And then, at the second time, it becomes the probability of modal realism given I'm seeing red, and it is T1, and I exist, and I am seeing red, and it is T2, right? I should probably put that in brackets or something like that. So you're saying what I'm not understanding is why this then, why is it not the case? Why is this sentence not true? Is what I'm asking.
Okay, so the reason the sentence is not true is when you evaluate each of the bits of evidence, what you have to do is conditionalize on the other bits of evidence. Right? So when you say the probability that I'm seeing red and it is T1 and I exist, when looking at how likely that is on modal realism, what you do is you first look at how likely it is that you'd see red given modal realism. Then you would look at, given that, how likely it is that it would be T1 on modal realism. Then you'd say, given that, how likely is it that I would exist on modal realism?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we do that. So see the thing before the second bracket? So the second bracket is where it says, like the last little the stuff after the and in the second sentence. So just the conditional probability of you seeing red and it being T2 at given modal realism is the same as given not modal realism. Like if all the earlier stuff comes true,
right,
and modal realism is true, that doesn't affect the relative likelihood that the later stuff would come true.
Right. So PR modal realism given I am seeing red and it is T1, you're saying that, or you did say before, maybe you don't agree now.
And by the way, I will say, I think it is adding unnecessary confusion that you scramble the order in which we're counting the evidence, where you generally you're aware you exist. Like your knowledge that you exist precedes your knowledge that you see red. I think it would probably be more helpful if you have that you exist be listed before.
Hang on though, because you yourself only considered this evidence in this way, very recently in your life, right? Like you didn't do this for decades of your life first. So, if we're talking about,
you're not. It's not like a thing that's on your mind. But if you have some experience and you ask, you're seeing red and you're asked, do you exist? You won't be like, I guess I do. I update now. It's like, but just general, like a good guide to Bayes is that you start from the more like basic stuff and you work to the more fundamental stuff. So if you're doing Bayes' theorem for the evidence for theism, for instance, you'd probably want to start with like these very broad features of the universe, that there is a physical universe. Then you do, there are laws. Then you do, the laws are applicable. Then you do fine tuning. And then you do consciousness. And then at the very end, you do the anthropic argument, because the anthropic argument is supposed to hold a lot of the other stuff in the background. But it isn't a hugely important point. But I think it's adding some unnecessary confusion where we say, first you think, you look at, you do the probability that you would be having this experience, and then the condition, and then the probability that you exist when you're having that experience requires that you exist. But I don't know. It isn't a huge deal. It doesn't matter that much.
It's helping me to get clear about what it is that you're thinking with respect to these things, because I feel like I've learned the way that you're thinking about it, which isn't something I knew before. So I take you in the first case to be saying still that this is true, right? So the probability of modal realism on that first piece of evidence, if you remember, this one here, right, is greater than not modal realism.
Yeah, probably given that I'm seeing red and it is T1, it's greater than, yeah.
And then in the second case, you're saying, so you're not exactly saying this, you're saying, so probability of modal realism given I'm seeing red and it's T2 and I exist, it's not the case that is greater, right? Because you're saying
hold on. Are we holding in the background the green bit?
Yes.
Yeah. So holding in the background, then yeah. So I would deny. I mean, sorry. It's slightly hard to keep track of it with the. It's not the case that.
Yeah. That's why I put it in red as well, because I'm like, this one's false, green for true, just to try and.
Yeah. Wait. So let's see. It's not the case that the probability of modal realism, given that I'm seeing red and is T1 and it is T2 and I exist, greater than the probability, given the falsity of modal realism, that I am seeing red and it is T2 and I exist. Wait. Okay. Sorry. Hard to.
Yeah. It's okay. So basically, this is a likelihood ratio comparison, right? So a likelihood ratio of modal realism.
The question is just, is it likelier? Yeah. So I guess I would agree with the second one, that it's not the case that it's likelier.
I should put it. I put it the wrong way around, so that might be what's confusing about this, right? I meant to, because I'm seeing red and T2, and I exist, given modal realism. So if I put it the right way around, maybe that'll make it easier to see what's going on. I don't know. What the hell? Go away one password. And then, similarly for this one. But you get the point, right? So I don't know if me restating it in the correct order. I mean, I think that this is, I guess the prior will be the same for modal realism in either case, right? Or does it change?
Wait, you're talking about the prior? Wait, PR is prior?
No. PR is probability.
Okay. The prior in modal realism is the same, but the overall.
Well, this is actually that will matter.
I guess it depends on what you mean, but it depends on
the audio update, right? Surely,
well,
because
it depends on what you. It depends on what you mean by prior. If you mean before you update on any of this stuff, then the prior.
Exactly. And so I think in this case, it's actually quite a complicated case to map out fully what's going on, right? It's not.
I mean, it tends to be tricky when you start trying to write out Bayes stuff. But I mean, look, the basic point is fairly straightforward, which is that just like the odds that you would have some experience, given that you exist and modal realism is true, like conditional on you existing in modal realism being true, the odds of you having some experience are no higher than the odds of you having that experience in the falsity of modal realism. I mean, actually,
in terms of prediction, I agree with you. But
I mean, the whole point of Bayes is that when you're making retrospective judgments, the way you should update is you should treat them as if you were making predictions, and you didn't know how it turned out. Right. So like when you're, I don't know, figuring out the prior, when you're doing Bayesian updating on the fact that you have, that a guy's blood was at this crime scene, you should say, oh, how much, if I didn't know his blood was at the crime scene, how much likelier would I think it was that his blood was at the crime scene if he committed the crime than if he didn't? And that determines the degree of the update.
Well, if we look at the two cases, right, in terms of what's in the hypothesis in each case, I sort of agree with what you're saying. I agree that there's a way that maybe we should and shouldn't go about using some of this methodology. But if we look at this way, right, and we've stipulated modal realism here, so we have, in terms of our hypothesis, all of these, every single possible way things could be, and one of them is where things are red, right, and we see red.
Yeah.
Whereas in the other world, we only have the one world, right? Like how do we think about our hypothesis in either case? It seems to me that this
Wait,
one.
hold on. So the worlds is the one world that exists in the right hand side, is that world qualitatively identical to each of the three non-red worlds?
I'm not sure, because I'm trying to understand how it is that you sort of think about this stuff when you're reasoning in this way. I'm not exactly sure how you would want to do the comparison, but I'm open to however you think.
I'm kind of confused. You made this little drawing setup.
Well, I'm trying to.
I was supposed to depict a scenario, but then I asked you what's going on in the scenario. And then you're like, "Well, you tell me."
Well, because I'm trying to.
I'm not the one who made the drawing.
Well, yes, you're not the one who made the drawing, but I mean, if we're using the Bayesian framework in this way, right, we should be able to follow through what's going on with the equation step by step, and go into the details of the way that affects things, and sort of clarify how we're thinking about things as we go along. And so, like when you've said, here's an obvious way.
If you want to give me a case, and I'll tell you how I walk through it in a Bayesian way, I'm happy to do that. But if you just give me a drawing, and I don't know what case that represents, I can't.
But that's what I've been trying to do, right? Like, so my initial thing that I was trying to do over here was to literally go through every piece of evidence step by step and see which equations come in, so we can change and step through every single step. It's sort of, in a sense, it's my fault that the drawings changed, because my hands are the ones that changed it. But it's because I've been trying to sort of clarify with each of the examples that you've given what's going on. If we'd stuck on just the one example, the drawing would be the same, right? It's because I've been trying to clarify as we go along that we've got all these different drawings that are sort of.
No, look, I'm not opposed to there being lots of different drawings. I thought many of the drawings were elucidating, but I'm trying to understand what this most recent drawing is.
Right.
Okay. So you have three boxes that are sort of see-through, that are sort of a dotted orange color, and one that's a dotted red color. And then I think they represent worlds on the left side. And then on the right side, you have only one box with the see-through orange color. So I'm trying to understand. So I asked you, like, okay, what kinds of worlds are these? Are the dotted orange boxes all worlds that are qualitatively the same? And you said, well, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to get from you. I didn't draw the boxes.
So part of this is me, and part of this is you, right? That what you've said there is helpful for understanding where the confusion is. So we've got this sentence, which I take to be a part of the updating procedure, right? It kind of follows from the stuff that we've been thinking about. And then a part of this is that we've got two hypotheses that we're comparing. One of them is modal realism. So you're right that this is an attempt to depict considering all of the possible worlds that there are, right? And then on this hypothesis, modal realism, one of those worlds is guaranteed to be one within which we're seeing red. So we at least get some prediction.
Okay, so the red box is the world where you see red.
Yeah. And now the question is, and I'm not sure on what the answer is to this, is what are we supposed to depict in the not modal realism box, right? And this, the reason that I'm doing this is to try and have a good intuition about what the likelihoods are that we're supposed to be comparing, you know, in order to kind of.
So I would say the most likely scenario in the non-modal realism box is that basically you don't get any observers, right? And that's for fine-tuning reasons. That's for various other sorts of reasons. But if you do get observers, probably you wouldn't get very many observers. So if the idea is that, so like the modal realism world involves, so the modal realism world is just a single kind of world, namely a giant multiverse, kind of world in the sort of like possible world philosophical sense of complete description of the way reality is.
Just on that point, some of these worlds presumably are also worlds with no observers, right? But but there's also obviously like infinitely many with observers as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if God creates observerless worlds, but sure, we can grant
okay.
That.
Oh right,
yeah.
So you're saying this is actually like a theism modal realism, right? So it's like a more specific modal realism.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be, but sure. I mean, we can do. Yeah.
Well, would there not be a difference between the two in the sense that
there will be some. It doesn't matter much for present purposes. But I mean, the distinction I was just trying to make was that the modal realist thing we're imagining is just one complete description of reality. So ironically, modal realism is in the philosophical sense only one possible world, and then it's just one maximally complete
I get
of how reality is. While the not modal realist world represents it's a big possibility space of what reality might be, right? So most of these scenarios, so if the boxes refer, so if the big boxes like the ones under MR, right, this big box that surrounds the little box, and under not MR, if these refer to like these big multiverses, right, this complete description of everything that's going on. If these refer to multiverses, well, multiverses are, so under modal realism you get this big multiverse. It'll obviously have infinite of the orange boxes and infinite of the red boxes, but I imagine that would be hard to draw. The non-modal realist world, you'd have a bunch of the very big boxes. Most of them would just be plain, would just be blank white. Many of them would have like one or two worlds, but you'd get a very low probability.
So what are we stipulating to make that the case? I guess because I guess like that's given some information, right? Like what's fixed in place to make it like that?
Well, it's just that in terms of the most likely ways for reality to be that are not modal realist, what you're referring to as modal realist, which I'm saying, which is just the world contains a bunch of stuff. For most of those ways, you wouldn't get observers, at least the most likely ways.
So the difficulty I'm having with understanding what goes in that not modal realist space is because that not modal realism space contains many different hypotheses that are not modal realism, right? And so when I'm like, well, what am I supposed to imagine in that space? Ironically, there's a lot of different possible worlds, right? Because it's like a lot of different ways of me imagining worlds in that not modal realism space. And then I'm personally then not even sure what evaluations I'm making anymore at that point. But I don't know about you, maybe.
Well, you're making evaluations about the most likely non-modal realist worlds. Now, there are arguments that you can give for why the most likely worlds don't contain anything interesting, right? So, but I mean, and we could talk about those arguments, but I mean, at the very least, most of these worlds don't contain some ginormous, like, unsettly many people existing, right?
So maybe here's the question is, so in the not modal realism space, to get a good idea of how many of those worlds include the evidence, right, which is what we're concerned about to perform the evaluation, then what we want to consider is, what do we actually fix in that? So do we consider all of the ways that, suppose, single universe naturalism is true or something, and there's no possible worlds, but then there's a lot of different types of single universe naturalisms that would come in modal realism, and then we concerned about the ratio of how many of those produce the experience of my seeing red, right? And I mean, what I want to know is how I'm supposed to depict this in a way where we can get a good grasp on what the comparison is.
I don't know a helpful way to depict it. If by depict you mean make a nice diagram to draw it, right? Because it's very complicated to draw the space of possible worlds. Now there being some huge infinity worth of people, this is a highly specific outcome. It's not the sort of thing you generally get by accident. You need extreme gerrymandering to get even more than Aleph null people. So it's highly unlikely you'd get some huge cardinality of infinity worth of people. So even though I don't have a precise method for determining what percentage, how likely various state of affairs are conditional on the falsity of modal realism, as you're calling it, just like the hypothesis there's a big multiverse. I don't have a nice theory of exactly how to do the math there, but to do all the calculations. But we can still do, we can still have judgments about which things are likely, just as, for example, I don't know. So suppose that we're, in the crime scene case where the person's blood was at the scene of the crime. I don't know how to exactly draw this case of possible worlds where I would be hard pressed to draw diagrams where odds that this would happen if they were at the scene of the crime, or to be precise about the odds that their blood would be there if they'd committed the crime versus if they hadn't. But nonetheless, that doesn't mean that their blood being at the scene of the crime isn't evidence for it. Maybe it would be helpful to introduce some arguments for SIA that might help elucidate this.
Just to pause on that last claim that you made, though, how would I think about that, right? So suppose that I was kind of with you in saying, this was some evidence of some crime or something. Now, I might say that, and what I mean by that, is if someone asks me why I think that, I say something like, well, I have an intuition, or a general sense, or it's inference to the best explanation. But then suppose I said, I'm doing strong Bayesian updating, right? If I said I was doing strong Bayesian updating, I would only say that if I could specify what those values and numbers were, such that it was true that I'd actually done strong Bayesian updating.
Okay,
if I wasn't,
I think you can do Bayesian updating, even if you can't precisely specify the numbers. I think Bayesian, to do Bayesian updating, you can know that A is likelier, that A is likelier given B than given C, even if you don't know the exact probability of A given B.
Okay, yeah. So now there's a slightly maybe we would weaken to say it's not strong Bayesian updating that we're doing, but it's likelihoodism or something, which is a type of Bayesianism that we're doing instead. That's fine. Maybe we would say that. Similarly, in the crime case,
likelihoodism, but it's still a perfectly fine form of reasoning.
Sure, it may be, though. Then if we bring that back to the crime case, once again, I wouldn't say that I was doing that unless I could specify what the relevant likelihoods were that I was comparing. So then that comes back to this case here.
Wait, in the crime case, what's wrong with just saying, look, the reason I think the person committed a crime is that it's likelier that their blood would be found at the crime scene if they did it than if they didn't. And so I take this to be evidence that they committed the crime.
Because we want to be careful between equivocating on using likelihood in the ordinary language sense of just meaning, basically I'm taking it to be evidence of this over that, versus the probabilistic sense where we're actually using numbers.
In ordinary language, no one thinks that's what likelihood means. That saying the likelihood of X is Y is I'm taking X to be evidence for Y, right? That's not what likelihood means. What people think likelihood, when you talk about the likelihood of something, they mean, how probable it is. So if you say X is of greater likelihood given Y than given not Y, then so long as it's true that the probability of X given Y is higher than not Y, there's nothing wrong with it. And you don't have to know exactly what the probability of X is given Y versus given not Y.
So what you're describing there, though, isn't likelihood as the equations aren't doing anything for us there. That the equations then operate as, I'm not sure what they operate as, metaphors for what we're doing, but they're not. We're not doing maths, right? If we do that.
Okay, when people in the real world do what is commonly called Bayesianism, they are not actually plugging in numbers and applying Bayes' theorem.
I don't think that's right. When the application, so Mono, who was here earlier, has a PhD in statistics, right? And he said he didn't know what we're talking about because this isn't the way that he uses that. The applications I'm aware of Bayesianism use empirical statistics to figure things out. Like, for example, the probability of someone like having a disease or something, or the probability of a batch being bad, given like samples that are taken from it. When people claim to be doing Bayesianism in the actual world, they're usually, well, it depends whether they're doing philosophy or not, but outside of the context of philosophy, they mean to be doing this procedure with numbers. In the context of philosophy, I agree that people often are not. They mean something slightly.
Yeah, I mean, I would be interested in hearing Mono chime in to hear what he was saying. But so right, okay, so it's true that like there are two different things that you might be doing. One is like the sort of precise math Bayesianism, where you actually have priors and you actually plug it in. Then another thing you might be doing is just a kind of reasoning that appears quite commonly. So, for example, we very often see
in philosophy, commonly in philosophy.
No, not just in philosophy, in tons of ordinary instances of reasoning. So, for example, we often see, here's one reason people thought OJ did it was because his blood was found at the scene of the crime, leading to the amusing Norm Macdonald joke. They said.
But the glove didn't fit Matthew as well. There you go.
Yeah. No, and there was a good Norm Macdonald joke, which was, prosecutors alleged that OJ was on speed during the time of the crime, but OJ denies it. He says, "Just test any of my blood, which was found at the crime scene, and you find no speed." But so now, an ordinary person would say, "Yeah, that's evidence that he committed the crime." And then if you ask, "Well, why is that evidence?" Well, here's one thing they might say. They'd say, "Well, it's really unlikely that his blood would be found at the scene of the crime if he didn't commit the crime." So all I'm saying is that what I'm doing in terms of reasoning is just like what the ordinary person is doing when they say that it's more likely that his blood would be found at the scene of the crime if he did it than if he didn't. I'm not claiming to be like plugging in numbers and applying Bayes' theorem.
Yeah.
All I'm claiming to do is be doing a kind of reasoning that sort of approximates ideal Bayesian reasoning.
So I can see what you're saying, and I'm willing to grant that there's a sort of looser sense, right, of what someone might say in a case like that. And I agree, though then I don't know why we wouldn't say something like, inference to the best explanation or abduction or something, rather than using any of the Bayesian stuff at all. Because it seems to be sort of inert. I can't see what the Bayes stuff is actually doing other than making the types of claims and inferences that we're making sort of maybe more confusing than they need to be.
Well, I mean, first of all, I wasn't the one who framed it in a Bayesian way, I don't think.
Well, hang on. You have in the past, at least, you would say, right?
Yeah, I do. I often give arguments in Bayesian ways. I mean, I think I can walk through why I think that's a good methodology. I mean, I think phrasing it as being about inference to the best explanation is good. Okay. I think what's nice about the Bayesian methodology is that it serves to one advantage, and this is certainly not the only advantage, is it serves to isolate individual data points and see how much they count for and against different hypotheses. Right. So suppose you say you do fine tuning, and you say the best explanation of fine tuning is is that I don't know why my camera just went dark. You say the best explanation of fine tuning is that there's a God. Well, then the atheist will say, no, I don't think that's the best explanation, and then you're arguing about other stuff. Or you raise the problem of evil to a theist. You say, the best explanation of apparently gratuitous evil is atheism, and they say, no, I don't think so. I think atheism is implausible for all these other reasons, and then you're off to the races. If you treat it in a Bayesian way, you can be more precise, where you don't have to all things considered evaluate which is the best explanation of it.
But let's look at that claim, though, the claim of precision, right?
Hold on. Let me just finish the sentence.
Yeah. I just think it's going to be superfluous to the point, though. The point is the one of precision, right? That's the conclusion that you're driving at. It's good because it helps us be more precise. I've tried really hard to make it more precise with these diagrams, right? But it didn't help because we didn't get to clarity about things. We got to sort of saying that that's either too anal.
That wasn't my point, and you may have learned what the point was if I'd finished the sentence. So the point is, it's not about how precise you are in the update. It's that you get to treat the data points one by one. So rather than having to evaluate as a whole whether theism or atheism is a better explanation, you just say the fact of evil, this is evidence for theism. The fact of fine-tuning, this is evidence. The fact of evil, that's evidence for atheism. The fact of fine-tuning, that's evidence for theism. And then you can consider the fact, and then you can sort of, tally up and say, okay, we have these 9 things that are evidence for theism, these 3 things that are evidence for atheism, and then you come to an all things considered judgment. So it allows us to come to a better judgment rather than the IBE method.
So similarly, I tried both, right? I tried to make things more precise and clearer every single step. I tried to detail the equation and geometrically show what the relative distributions and likelihoods would look like at each step, and diagram it out. Now, okay, it could have been better, or there could be more, maybe with more time under more ideal conditions, that those things would get a bit clearer. But I get the sense that it wasn't going in that direction. I feel more confused now, actually, about a series of points. Maybe that you could say that's progress because I'm considering things that I wasn't considering before. But I've also not got the sense from this that I understand what your conclusions are, which I understood sort of all along, but I don't feel that I've got good reasons about why consider the distributions one way rather than another, or something like that.
Wait, sorry, what do you mean by consider the distributions?
So for example,
when I was a share of possible worlds that have different,
in a number of different steps, I might mean the likelihood ratios, for example. So the step that's on the screen right now in that not modal realism box, you said, well, here's what it would look like, and then you sort of told me where you wanted to get to, which would be that it less strongly predicts, seeing the red square than not. But then I'm kind of asking questions of that. So what do we fix and why in that space? For example, do we consider different types of single universe naturalisms, right? Do we consider, and then what are the relative sizes in those single universe naturalisms? Or do we put non-modal realism theisms in that space as well? Or do we, but I'm not getting then any sense, I know where you want to get to with it. Yeah, but when I ask questions,
you put every so if you're comparing the odds of modal realism, the odds of non-modal realism, then you put every non-modal realist theory.
Well, I know that's we both know that that's what we're meant to do. But I guess maybe what I'm not seeing, and maybe you can see, is what that actually looks like, right? And I think that being able to geometrically represent that is equivalent to being able to express it numerically as well. If I can't draw that out and explain those details, similarly, I can't any number is just a representation of what I'm supposed to be imagining here, right?
Okay, suppose that the stars spelled out made by God. Would that be evidence for the existence of God? They spelled out made by God at the beginning of the universe. And I'll just tell you the follow-up question. Can you draw the diagram for all the possible worlds and what percentage of them have the star spelling out made by God? Like, no, but nonetheless, you can intuitively
there's a couple of things there, right? One is that I'm genuinely not sure whether or not I think that I'd consider that evidence in that case. I actually don't know, and I'm not like being funny there. But even if I did, I wouldn't have.
Sorry. Let me just give just one extra addendum. Let's say both the star spell out made by God, and we find some way of ruling out basically every plausible explanation other than just like it's just a pure coincidence, right? So we rule out. If you find some way of ruling out simulators, we find some way of ruling out.
I still have a hard time, like, and that's because
I think that's just like a clear reductio.
Yeah. But I think this is because we have like very different intuitions about like what God would do.
Is there anything that could convince you of the existence of God?
I don't know rationally, to be honest.
So if God came down from the heavens and declared that there's the second coming and it was happening, that wouldn't be evidence? Or sorry,
it's kind of stipulated. I mean, when you say if God came down from heavens, like, would I know it was? If I didn't know it was God, right?
Or a being came down from the heavens and declared, it is I, God. I'm ushering in the second coming, and peace on earth was restrained, was brought about, and angels appeared, and every problem ended, and then in a case like that.
So I mean, I sort of suspect in a scenario like that I would probably be a theist or something, but not because of like I did some Bayesian updating or something. So and like we've got to be careful about distinguishing between what I know in that. So like obviously if God's come down from heaven, then you already believe it, and so it gets kind of tricky. But the point I guess I'm trying to make to get back to what would be. I could consider these things evidence, but then still say that what I was doing there wasn't Bayesian updating, right? Like I could say, look, I'm convinced, or I consider that those things spelt out in the sky, but then say, but that's not the upshot of like me going step by step through some Bayesian framework. In fact, that's not what I did do in those scenarios.
Right. So obviously, like you won't observe it, and then you take out a Bayes spreadsheet. You take out a Cameron Bertuzzi Bayes spreadsheet, and you plug in all the Bayes factors.
And I asked Chad to get the numbers up. I say, look, it's not high enough.
These are rookie numbers. But my claim is that there are lots of ordinary kinds of reasoning that are done by the folk that are sort of approximate Bayesian reasoning. So like in the crime scene case, where you see the person seeing blood was at the scene of the crime, I think what they're doing is something very much like Bayesian reasoning, where like the implicit thought behind it is, well, it's so unlikely their blood would be like, yes, it's possible, but it's so unlikely if they didn't do it. Well, it's much likelier if they did it. And so, this probably they did it. And so I think like there are lots of cases where there's some kind of reasoning from the folk, and then like fancy Bayesian stuff, and it's just a way of precisifying it. So I agree, you probably wouldn't be doing the like explicit Bayesian reasoning, but what you would be doing is a kind of reasoning like that, where you'd observe something and you might either implicitly or explicitly think like, well, that's very unexpected if atheism is true. And so then you'd conclude that atheism is false.
Yeah, I agree with you that there are similarities between, sort of Bayesian idealizations and what I do and what other people do in like some of these sorts of scenarios, right? I guess one thing that I have an issue with is that I'm not sure that it's like non-philosophers are trying to do Bayesianism but failing or something.
That's not what I said.
Well,
I don't think they're trying to do Bayesianism.
Yeah, sure. Okay, let me clarify what I meant.
They're engaged in a kind of reasoning that's similar to Bayesianism, but is not.
So here's what I'm trying to communicate by saying that is more that I don't know that in those cases Bayesianism would be better than what they are doing.
I don't think it would be better than what they are doing. Like, I think it's perfectly fine for the folk to engage in reasoning that's basically Bayesian reasoning, but not use, like, it's basically, it's the same broad kind of reasoning, but it's just not as precise, and they don't give it the fancy labels. But like, okay, it doesn't matter so much if it's precise.
It does a little bit, given some of the things that you've said, where you were using these cases to try and sort of justify how we would reason in these cases, to justify how we ought to reason in this case, right? And if it's the case that that's fine, it's fine to not be doing this in those cases, well, then that doesn't get you to...
So it's fine not to be doing exactly explicit Bayesian reasoning, right? It's fine to like not plug everything into a Bayesian spreadsheet, but what you should do is you should be doing some kind of reasoning that at least roughly resembles Bayesian reasoning. Your reasoning should, like, it should look relatively like Bayesian reasoning. So you don't have to do explicitly Bayesian reasoning, but in the prosecutor case, you should do a kind of, in the like right seed case, you should do a kind of reasoning where when you learn something that's more expected if the person commits the crime than if they didn't, then you think it's likelier that they committed the crime, right? So you should think their blood being the scene of the crime, their DNA matching, etc. That these things make you more confident they did it. It doesn't matter if you talk in the official, Bayesian language, and it's folk are obviously are not, and they're not expected to. But insofar as you're reasoning well, then your reasoning will at least sort of roughly approximate Bayesian reasoning.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I'm just not seeing how agreeing to that in those cases is getting us to it being better to use Bayesianism in these sorts of philosophical cases that we're discussing. And, just to add a bit more into that, like when I am trying to make it as clear as possible each step along the way, I'm not seeing it helping. I'm not seeing it as clarifying anything sort of over and above the more sort of looser way of reasoning and thinking about these things that you might use instead of having equations and numbers and things involved.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like almost a matter of logic that if A is likelier given B than given C, then A is evidence for B. And so insofar as that's right, then your reasoning is going wrong if A is like way likelier given B than given C, but then you learn A and you don't get any update in favor of B than C. And you haven't given any counterexample to thinking that you should be Bayesian in your reasoning, because my claim is that in the cases like the prosecutor case, like the crime scene case, it doesn't matter if you're explicitly being Bayesian. Like, it doesn't. You can talk in the language of evidence and so on, rather than the language of probability of B given A and so on and so forth. But so long as you're like what you're doing is functionally equivalent to using Bayes' theorem, where you learn a thing, it's likelier on one hypothesis than another hypothesis, and then you think the hypothesis is more, and so then you think the hypothesis is more likely, then your reasoning is okay. I mean, can you give me any example in a non-theological context where you learn something that's likelier on one theory than another theory, but you don't think you should find the first theory more likely in relative terms?
Okay, so where I learned something that's predicted more by one theory than another theory, and you don't think that is confirmatory evidence. Is that the question? Sorry, just to make sure.
You learn something that's likelier on theory A than theory B, and yet you don't think that learning that thing is evidence for theory A over theory B.
I don't know if I can come up with examples. I don't know if there are any.
Because then it seems like a special pleading fallacy to think this only applies in the.
Well, no, I'm not. No, because I'm not saying. I don't think that that's crucial to anything that I'm saying. Right? I think I can agree to that. Because the point I'm making is about why is it better to couch things in the Bayesian terms than than not is the point I've been driving.
You don't have, like, when I talk about these arguments, I don't like. I'm not, I don't like put precise numbers on things or plug it into the formula.
Yeah.
What I say is just this is likelier. I mean, I sometimes put rough numbers onto things, and we can talk about that methodologically. But I mean, I did that once in one article. But I mean, I guess we could talk about that methodologically, but it seems relatively aside from our major disagreement. But I mean, just if you're arguing that A gets confirmed by over B by C, because C is likelier given A than given B, then that's a perfectly permissible kind of reasoning.
Yeah, I'm not saying that I'm against abductive inference or something. I'm definitely in favor of it. If you want to talk to Jack, feel free.
Hey, Jack.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Yeah, going well?
Wait, what'd you say?
Going well. How are you?
Doing good. Sorry, I can't have my camera on right now, but hopefully that's fine. And I also can't be here for too long. I got to get back to work in a second. But I did have one sort of, I guess I have a number of different arguments against fine-tuning. I don't know if we have time for all of them, but maybe another time. One concern I guess I have with fine-tuning is once we stipulate that the type of God we're talking about is omnipotent, then it seems like the need for a lot of these physical parameters go out the window. For instance, I don't see why God couldn't just miraculously sustain life, especially if you're not like if I'm understanding you correctly, Matthew, I'm not entirely sure, but I think you're a dualist. It seems like a lot of the goods that, are often thrown around in the Odysseys and reasons why God might want to create are predicated on certain goods you get from conscious experience specifically. And if that's the case, I don't even know like what the need is for, fine-tuning any of these physical laws. Why can't God sort of just create consciousness in a non-physical sense? And likewise, if there is some need for conscious or for like physical creation, it seems like even if laws are such that the universe is hostile towards life, I don't know why God can't just continually intervene and miraculously sustain life.
Yeah. So he could, but it's a question of probabilities. The probability of a finely tuned universe is extremely low on theism. I mean, sorry, I'm right in slip on atheism. While it's very high on theism, it's extremely low on atheism. So that means that unless the probability is extremely low on atheism, it'll still be evidence for theism over atheism. And so then the question is it extremely low? Well, maybe God would create a world largely through miraculous intervention, but maybe he would also create a world just by like having laws that naturally produce conscious creatures. There are all sorts of benefits that come from it. Having us sort of be, like naturally shaped by our environment, having a stable environment on which the things depend, having to not meddle. You might think these things are kind of good. All you need to think is it's not extremely improbable that these things are good. So that's the first point. Just the odds are like so low on theism that if you can tell any even remotely plausible explanation of this, then it'll be evidence for theism over atheism. And, by the way, so the argument you're giving, it comes from Nielsen and Bobby gives the same argument in a paper called Electrons and Love. I currently have a paper under review, an analysis called Electrons Out of Love, where I respond to this argument. Now, the second point is that if you rely on anthropic reasoning, then you get an interesting result, which is that that insofar as God creates a bunch of different worlds, then as long as some of them are like this, then that confirms our evidence, where it doesn't have to be that they're all like this. It just has to be that there are some of them that are like this. So as a result, if God created a sort of diverse array of a bunch of different worlds, like maybe he creates all the cosmological constants, well, it's likely we'd be here. But then on atheism, it's much less likely that such a universe would exist.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I'll start with the first argument. It seems like for.
Wait, sorry. I do want to get back to the convo with Nathan for before not too long. So maybe like I don't know, limit yourself to like 3-ish questions.
No. This is gonna be a follow up, and then I'll go. You can go back to Nathan if that's
okay. Sounds good.
But so regarding the first point, it seems like for the existence of a finely tuned universe to count as evidence in favor of theism, it needs to be the case that under theism, the probability of a finely tuned universe is like more expected, that is what we would likely see. But there's no reason as to why on theism we should expect a finely tuned universe instead of any other type of universe where God could just miraculously sustain life, then it doesn't seem like this actually counts in favor of theism. Second point, I'm actually sort of agnostic on the anthropic argument. I don't know enough about statistics to sort of have an opinion. We don't have to go into it for now, but yeah, for it, like to me, the problem of evil is just a sequencing issue to a lot of these questions, because it seems like what we would expect under your type of theism is not just the existence of conscious life, but one that seems morally justifiable. And so, of course, that gets into a whole different discussion. But yeah, I'm mainly curious to hear why you think that finely tuned universe still counts in favor of theism, even if you are willing to grant that it seems like there's no reason why this is specifically what we'd expect on theism instead of a world where just God miraculously sustains life despite physical parameters not being conducive to life.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the short answer is like the kind of world where, oh, hey, Silas. The kind, but hello.
Oh, hello.
Oh,
Oh, you already brought me in?
Yeah.
I thought you were going to wait a while. It looked like you were going to get back to Nathan.
yeah, no, sorry. Okay, so I mean, the short answer is that like the probability, the worlds where God creates with non-finely tuned constants, these are all sort of broadly similar worlds, and they all involve a world that's not naturally life permitting, where God makes it life permitting through gerrymandering. And so, like, no matter how many variations of that won't, like, if there were just one world like this versus if there were a million conceivable worlds like this, they should take up roughly the same share of probability space. And so even if you think these occupy like 99% of probability space, as long as even 1% of probability space is occupied by the like worlds where life arises naturally, you'll inevitably get the result that life arising naturally is evidence for theism, just because it's so unlikely in atheism. The point about anthropics, I wasn't making the anthropic argument. I was just saying if you buy even the way anthropics, like, you don't have to buy the anthropic argument to buy this reasoning. The idea is just, and in fact, I go through in the paper and show how it holds on every view of anthropics. God, I need a haircut. But I don't. That was unrelated to anything else. But I just noticed in the screen that my hair's a mess. But yeah, anyways, so the anthropic argument, it doesn't rely on the anthropic argument. It only relies on the notion that it'll fall in every theory of anthropics, because the idea is if God creates a bunch of worlds, he'll create some like this. And if he creates some creatures that are like this, then your existence is going to favor this. It'll still be more likely that you would exist than on atheism, where almost certainly no creatures like this would exist. Yeah.
Okay, we'll continue this later. I'll let you get back to Nathan now. But yeah.
Good chatting. Yeah. All right, Silas. Good to see you. Yeah. It's been a bit.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, going well.
Yeah, so I guess my question is kind of totally in a different direction from what you've been talking about. It's hard to follow because you're going in so many different rabbit holes at this point. But yeah, if you want to go to the anthropic argument, I've got one thing that I haven't been able to get past.
Yeah, sure.
So I guess the key part of the argument is you always say, well, there's Beth two people that actually exist, right?
I'd say there are Beth two possible people, and then if they're at the very least, then I say if there are Beth two possible people, then I think there are Beth two actual people.
Okay, so yes, you do think that two people actually exist?
Yeah.
In my head, it doesn't make sense to say that any uncountably infinite number of people or anything could actually exist. Because it seems like if you have a number of distinct things that actually exist, it's always going to be countable, even if they're all in different universes. Does that make sense?
I mean, why do you think that?
I mean,
So like here's a sort of seemingly conceivable multiverse. So take our universe, assume our universe is infinite in size, and make a new universe formed out of every subset of our universe, right? So take every like rearrange, take every square foot by square foot segment of our universe, take every combination of those and make it its own universe. If you do that, you'll get Beth 1 universes.
But I don't know if those things can all actually exist, let's say. Because if you're actually creating all of them, then there would actually have to be a countable infinite number of them, right?
I don't accept that. Why?
Basically, so I try to think of uncountably infinite things that we do know that exist, such as say real numbers. But in order for an uncountably infinite number line to exist, I mean, you have to have infinitely divisible parts. So let's say if we say we have one universe, I mean, we can divide up that universe, sure, but each time we're doing that, it's going to be another universe. That's one universe. We don't have half a universe.
Wait, sorry. So, maybe I don't quite get the argument.
Well, I guess let's say if we talk about people, no person is half a person, right? Each person is still one person.
Yeah.
So we can't have like the 72.32 person.
Yeah. Right. So people are not like identical to real numbers in that they're they're like half of a person. Right. But the claim is that the analog isn't that they're analogous in that sense. The claim is that they're analogous in that there's a bijection between the number of people and the number of real numbers. That is to say, you could pair them 1 to 1. Well, I think there are more people than real numbers, so you can pair them 1 to 1. But at the very least, you could pair every real number with a person.
So then, in order for that to be the case, it would have to be like a 72.1 person, a 72.001 person, 72.002.
There would have to be a person who you could pair with that number.
Okay.
But the person doesn't have to be a fraction of a person. It just has to be there are enough people that you could pair them with that number. But I mean, if you make every combination of cubic feet in the universe, then you get Beth 1 people, and then you get it being possible to pair that multiverse, the people in that multiverse, with the people with the real numbers. There doesn't seem anything impossible about making that multiverse.
I guess I can't think of any other example where there is an infinite number of distinct things and that is uncountable in the universe that we know.
You can't think of any other example of there being an uncountably infinite number of things?
Yeah.
Well, so there's a real number. I think the number of functions over the number of naturals or something is Beth 1 or Beth 2. If you just go on the Wikipedia page for Beth numbers.
Okay, sorry. I mean, things that actually exist, not possible things. Possible things.
Sorry, are you assuming that mathematical objects don't exist?
Yeah, I am saying that the mathematical objects do not exist in the same
I'm
sense
informed that the things that are cardinality Beth 1 are the transcendental numbers, the irrational numbers, the real numbers, the complex numbers, and various other things. But okay, you're assuming mathematical things don't exist?
Yes. I do not think mathematical concepts exist in the same sense that people could exist.
I do. Well, it depends on exactly what you mean by in the same sense. But I think they equally exist. Right, they're very different sorts of things, but they both have the property of existing. But I mean, putting that aside,
I guess when I think about it, or if you pick a number on the real number line, does that number exist? like, well, yeah, it
I think 7 exists.
exists, but
That's right.
yeah,
I mean, in order,
it exists,
I
but
think
it's
7
in
is
the
between-
universe. Does
Yeah, I mean,
7
we
exist
could talk
in the
about this.
universe?
Well, I don't think it
Okay.
exists in the universe, but I think it exists. Right, but so now you're saying, well, you don't know of anything that that there are Beth one of. I mean, there aren't that many things where we know exact how many of them there are all throughout the universe. Like, we don't know how many baseballs there are, for example, or how many hands, or how many Bibles, or how many people, right? Because we only have observed the ones on Earth. So my claim is that I think there are uncountably infinite of all these things for anthropic reasons. So if the argument assumes that there aren't more than Beth one of anything, then the argument just begs the question, because it's an argument for there being more than Beth one of something.
I'm also kind of, I don't know if I can follow when you say things like Beth 2 being Beth more than Beth 1 being more than, like when you talk about other infinities being more than this infinity, it seems like you're playing a little loose with the terminology, but that's probably another thing.
Wait, I mean,
Yeah.
That some infinities are bigger than others is, like, this is something mathematicians are fine with.
That I agree with, but
Oh,
I mean, I know. I guess when we use it to talk about, never mind. You know what? That's another thing. But yeah, so the main point I wanted to get at is, like, if let's say, you know, we have our universe. This is everything that we can observe. We know there are not uncountably infinite of any actual things in this universe, like uncountably infinite baseballs. Because even if there were, if there was a baseball in every 5 inches of the universe, it would still be countable, right?
Yeah. So any spatiotemporally bound region can only have at most L if null of anything.
Right. Yeah. So I guess I'm thinking of people kind of in the same sense as that. But even if you think people are,
but I agree, you can only have finitely many people in our spatiotemporally connected universe.
But I guess my argument is that even if you're talking about a multiverse where every person is a soul, that's still distinct people, so therefore would still be a countable infinity.
But every real number is distinct, but there are more than L null numbers, and you don't have to think they're souls. You can have any view of what persons are.
Well, I guess with real numbers, you can't say they all. It doesn't make sense to me to say that they all simultaneously exist, because for example, between any two real numbers,
I don't see a reason to think that. Right. So if you don't think they exist, I guess I don't see a reason to think that. In order to think that any two things are distinct, that for any two things to be distinct, it has to be that there's some that for any collection of things that where they're each distinct, I didn't see why it has to be countable.
So I guess let me.
Like, it just seems like you could make, just Beth 1 duplicates of the same universe, for example, or Beth 1 slightly different universes.
Let me think. What was Beth 1 again? Which infinity was that?
Oh, sorry. Beth 1 is it's the number of reals.
Okay.
I do want to continue the chat with Nathan.
Yeah, all right. You can move on. I guess I said what I wanted to say, but
definitely, send me a message over Discord, and happy to chat more about this later.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna go play some Magic. I'll talk to you later.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I met Silas many years ago we were playing at a Magic the Gathering game store that I used to go to, and he was very, very good at Magic the Gathering. This was like 8 years ago or something.
I saw that in that first conversation, you started talking in terms of probability spaces and probabilities again.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm not against talking in terms of probability spaces and probabilities.
Yeah, I know. I don't think you're against it. I just think it was a little bit incongruent with some of the stuff we were talking about in the conversation before.
Well, the sorts of things that I was saying were, I think, the sorts of things that might appear in like perfectly ordinary reasoning, right? So, if you're talking to a layperson, you might say to them, like in response.
I think you already know what I'm going to say, because this. You're going to tell me to imagine a case where someone talks in this way, and I think I can imagine that, but I just don't know what ordinary people would say. I mean, my anecdotally, ordinary people don't tend to say probability space to me, but I agree. Okay, most charitable I can do. You're going to say the argument was about that there's a loose analogy between the two ways of talking, something like that, right? And so you can kind of translate one into the other, the loose way into the other way of talking.
Yeah, I think I was maintaining the loose way of talking.
I got the impression that you weren't doing that because of the types of language that you used, like about specific probabilities and probability spaces.
I didn't give a specific probability.
I agree. You didn't give a number, right? But you referred to, and you used the language that you would use if you were using a number. And I think that's the sort of thing that I don't like.
But I mean, this is just a perfectly fine kind of reasoning. So imagine, go back to the crime scene case. You find the guy's blood at the crime scene.
Yeah.
And, but the guy's blood at the crime scene, it's in a weird location, or something. Like it's not exactly at where the murder happened. It's like located a few feet away or something. So someone says, oh, I don't think he committed the crime because his blood is a few feet away rather than right where he committed the crime. And you say, yeah, that's a little bit unexpected if he did it, but it's just so unexpected that his blood would be at the scene of the crime scene in the first place that overall it's evidence for him having the crime.
But here's what I take. If we're using this as an example, here's what I sort of take you to be doing, right? On the jury. Oh, my camera's gone. Let me bring myself.
Yeah, and by the way, I do want to wrap up in like 15 minutes.
Yeah, no worries. Sorry. My camera should be back there. So here's, someone says that on the jury, and then here's what I take Matthew on the jury to be doing, right? Matthew goes, well, I'm a philosopher and I know Bayesianism, right? And you go, and actually, given what I observe, I've got a very interesting Bayesian argument. Consider the probability space, right? If we look at the probability space, we can see all the possible worlds. And given that modal realism is true and there's all these possible worlds, that strongly predicts that we would see this outcome with the person being innocent. And so I've figured out a way of seeing that the person's innocent using probabilities and, some epistemic method that's more rigorous, and it uses Bayesianism, and that might sort of persuade or convince people because there's this sort of language of rigor that's attached to the argument that's being put forward, rather than saying, well, I sort of think it's this way rather than that, or I loosely infer this, or like the best explanation is this, or something which is more up for grabs. It's less sort of strong, the claim, right? I think that the Bayesian stuff is, if it's not actually being used, should probably not be, put forward in the argument.
Well, so, there are various ways in which, is your worry about the Bayesian argument just like that it adds an unnecessary degree of makes it sound like you're being precise when really you're just pulling stuff out of your ass?
That's one of the concerns I have. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The other concern I have is that it then legitimizes discourses that are either really meaningless or don't have any value for people's lives, unless they enjoy having those sorts of discourses, which is a different sort of thing. But then my hope is that I can lead people to see that there are better things to do than often have those discourses. I guess another concern I have is that people might trick themselves into thinking that they're doing more than they are doing, as well.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think this is it's certainly possible that people will end up overinflating their intuitions that go into priors. It's also possible that people will end up discounting their intuitions. We can have a discussion about how much we should trust our intuitions. But I mean, there's some times when it's hard to be precise about what you're saying without talking about either talking about sort of Bayesian kinematics or analogs of Bayesian kinematics, where either talking about priors or some synonym of priors, or just say how likely you would think the thing was before you consider the evidence. But I mean, look, all the arguments I'm making, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter much how you talk about them or the exact words you make. I'm just saying there's some fact about the world, and that fact is likelier on the supposition that God exists than that God doesn't exist. So it raises the probability of God.
So here's there's a weak sense in which that might be right and still work. I think though that if you were to jettison the Bayesian ways of talking and thinking, then we'd have a sort of way of proceeding with the dispute where your ways of making the claims that you're making as premises in the argument would be really vastly weakened, and then there might be more dialogical force to certain objections, right? Because
which bits would be vastly weaker with, say, the anthropic argument?
Well, I don't know if I used the language vastly, but maybe it would be vastly.
I think you did, but
okay, right. Maybe I did, and the reason I said that is because I'm actively trying to not be polemical, and that sounds polemical, but maybe I.
Yeah, I mean, no worries. You can take back the vastly.
So. Yeah, I think for example, when the talk about the self-indication assumption, the types of counting that we're doing and the way that we're doing those assessments, I think that it doesn't seem it. I think that outside of thinking it makes sense inside a particular type of formal framework, I think that it sounds really like a wild claim, to say, for example, I exist, and the best explanation of that is that an uncountable infinity of different people of me spatio-temporally disconnected from me exist.
Yeah, I agree. It sounds like a wild claim. Maybe, depending on your intuitions, you shouldn't accept it absent being given strong reasons. My claim is strong reasons.
I know that. But I'm saying what I think makes it seem plausible is when it's well, in this science-y framework using probabilities, it statistically predicts it. When I see, the conditional bar and stuff, it's leading me into this sense of certainty of formalism.
Okay, when the basic argument that you and I have talked about an hour ago, that just it's likelier that you exist if there are more people. Who in the world finds the persuasiveness of that to depend on them imagining Bayes bars? It's just ridiculous.
I think lots of people. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's an active question.
This is very strange armchair speculation with no.
Yeah, I think so. What I'm saying is, I think that it is an active question for experimental philosophy. There is actually some evidence in the reasoning and biases literature about the way that people deal with evidence that's presented to them in different ways that would seem to indicate that people will kind of get intimidated by formalism. But specifically for the Bayesian,
people definitely can get intimidated by formalism, but that doesn't mean. I mean, when you say A is likelier than B, you're not using any formalism. What your claim is that they're imagining formalism.
So what I'm saying, and this is something that experimental philosophy could potentially answer, is that if the sorts of things that you're saying about anthropic reasoning were presented to people outside of a Bayesian framework, then they're less persuasive to people than when they're given inside of it. So I think that it's the formalism is doing the work in terms of persuading people that there's something going on there.
Okay. Well, so I have had a large number of conversations with random Oxford students where I present to them, like, in very simplified form, the SIA. And I don't say anything about Bayes' theorem, but I just say, consider a case, coin flipped, heads, one person created, tails, 10
I
people.
know this is going to sound bad, but I genuinely don't believe you here because of whenever I've seen you present it, you've done that. So like in the past conversation, when you did that, like even after the conversation we're just having, you use the probability language and probability spaces and so forth. Like it's very natural.
There's a difference between talking about probabilities and talking about precise Bayesian kinematics. I agree. Well, I talk about probabilities. And if you want to make a probabilistic argument, then you're going to inevitably talk about probabilities. But you like constantly obfuscate between talking about probabilities and talking about like the
well, I'm not
complex
trying to
Bayesian formalisms.
Yeah, I'm not trying to obfuscate. I think that when you use the locution the probability space, I don't think
I didn't say the probability space. I said the probability, which is a perfectly ordinary.
No, you did in that conversation because I typed it in my private chat window right at the time when it happened because I wanted to remember it and not forget.
Wait,
it.
let me find the.
I
think I said a small share of the probability space.
Right, and this is, leading someone into thinking that there is something going on here more so than you just saying this is what I think, right?
Okay. Well, so the phrase the probability space has a different meaning from the phrase this is what I think. When I say X has a small share, when I say X has a small share of the probability space, when I'm talking about the conditional probability of something given something else, where I say, worlds like this have such a small share of the probability space given on theism, on atheism, then versus on theism. Sorry, I would say on atheism, worlds where the cosmological constant is finely tuned have such a small share of the probability space, while worlds where the constant is finely tuned on theism or higher for such and such reasons, like that I'm not imagining any formalism and I'm not drawing any graphs. It's not a particularly weird or unnatural way of talking.
I dispute this. Yeah, that's the conclusion I disagree.
I submit that if I said this to my mom, she wouldn't find it particularly confusing. If you said this to but that's because she's your. They wouldn't be confused. Nor would they imagine.
I don't think that's right. You don't have the evidence. That's not what my experience tells me, and I don't have data to kind of indicate what you're saying, right? My experience is that non-philosophers find the ways that philosophers talk incredibly peculiar and odd.
I agree that's true of many of the ways that philosophers talk, but talking about probability space is a little weirder than normal talk about probability. But just ordinary probability talk isn't.
So here's a question for my view then is so what do I think is going on in that case when, I think there would be a difference between the way that a non-philosopher would interpret probability space talk versus, Seemings talk or something like that. And the reason that I think that there's a difference is because non-philosophers are typically trained in maths to some degree where they have some concepts of probability and some understanding of it. So then when someone comes along in a position of authority, presenting arguments in a way that seems formal and seems intellectually legitimate to them, they will not be in a position to assess whether or not those things are being used.
It's just such a ludicrous claim that a large part of how you're evaluated.
I don't think it's ludicrous.
Of how you're how these arguments are being evaluated. Is based on the use on one occasion of a word like probability space. Yeah. It's just.
But is that? Hang on though. So is this your argument? It's a bizarre claim, right? So the thinking that and Beth too causally disconnected people exist is a bizarre claim, Matthew. Come on, the point is you don't want me to engage with your positions.
There are some bizarre claims that you should believe because there are good reasons to believe that they're true.
Well, yeah, and I think there are good reasons to believe that my claims are true, right? Obviously, I think that. I try
it on several occasions to present the reasons for a thing there about. For thinking SIA is true, and at no time, I do find rather frustrating about your approach to philosophy, Or
I know.
very often it seems like you're like interested in like, psychologizing philosophers and figuring out like you're very interested in the way people talk. But it seems like you're much less interested in seeing whether there are like arguments for like a surprising conclusion, and whether there can be premises given in support of them. You seem like obstinately opposed to the idea that philosophy can ever tell us anything interesting other than that philosophers suck.
It depends what you mean. I mean, I think maybe you.
Are there any important insights that you think philosophy has taught us, like things that you think have been shown to be true through philosophical argument?
When you say us, what like who you're referring to? Like me, you.
Well, okay, let's take you for instance.
For me, I mean, I think that my views about linguistics now come from for philosophy study initially, and I think that they're interesting and valuable.
I think they come primarily from studying philosophy or from studying linguistics.
Well, I think it's a complicated.
Is it just like the causal history of you studying linguistics traces back to philosophy?
It's the causal history, yeah. So
okay, well, come on. I mean, that's not an insight from philosophy any more than an insight from math. If in a math class I start reading a philosophy book, my philosophical insights are from.
I actually don't think. No, I think it is more so than that, because it's hard to say exactly what the relationship is between. I think, was it a Beth that you said? I can't remember what happened 2 seconds ago, but whatever you said, was an example where something was crazily disconnected, and it'd be hard to tell a story about what the connection was. In the case of philosophy, there's this thing called philosophy of language, right? And there are questions in philosophy of language which pre-theoretically might seem like legitimate questions or seem very interesting. And I think that approaching them through the lens of philosophy led me to deconstruct some of those questions and I think I actually have a slightly richer view of linguistics than some people who purely study linguistics as a result of having approached it through deconstructing philosophical questions. So
okay, so the important thing that philosophy has always said is that philosophical questions are BS, basically. And
well, not all. It depends which ones, right?
Sorry, I didn't mean every. Wait, that there are some philosophical questions that are BS. That's the only important insight it teaches. Yeah, I mean, I think there are lots of interesting and surprising things that I've learned from philosophy. Lots of like arguments for counterintuitive conclusions. But anyways, I mean, we have been going for like 3 hours, and I'm kind of hungry, so I want to eat.
No worries.
So I think I'm going to wrap up. Sorry, I think I may have gotten a bit too
it's okay.
irritated.
I understand.
But despite this, I still think you're a truth seeker. Yeah. All right. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for those who tuned in. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.